Hi guys, tonight we're going to explore the beginning of one of the longest and most misunderstood frontier conflicts in American history. You settle beside the quiet glow of an evening campfire while the wide lands of the Southwest stretch beyond the reach of the flames. The desert air feels surprisingly cool after the heat of the day. Somewhere beyond the darkness, a coyote calls across distant hills, and the sound lingers longer than expected. The mountains stand in silence, watching over valleys where generations have lived, travelled, hunted, traded, and survived long before new borders appeared on paper maps. This is not yet the story of famous battles. Instead, it is the quieter beginning, where small choices slowly gather into events that later generations remember as history. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, before the journey truly begins. I would love to know where you are listening from today. Tell me your location and your local time in the comments below. It is always remarkable to imagine listeners scattered across the world, sharing the same quiet story beneath different skies. Now dim the lights. Your breathing gradually matches the gentle rhythm of the evening wind. You leave behind modern highways and glowing cities. Instead, you walk through a landscape where almost every mile demands patience. Every distant ridge hides another valley. Every narrow canyon leads toward another question. The Southwest of 1849 is both beautiful and unforgiving. You notice the smell of dry earth mixed with the faint scent of sage after a brief afternoon rain. Dust settles softly across your boots. A horse quietly exhales nearby, its warm breath drifting into the cooling night air before disappearing into darkness. Nothing here feels rushed. Long before the United States reached these lands, many Apache communities had already mastered them. Their knowledge was not written inside thick books or marked upon printed maps. Instead, it lived within memory, family, observation, and experience passed carefully from one generation to another. Children learned which springs flowed throughout the dry months. Hunters recognized tiny signs left by animals almost invisible to unfamiliar eyes. Families understood where shelter could be found when sudden storms crossed the mountains. The word Apache itself actually describes several related groups rather than one united nation. Different communities occupied different regions across what is now Arizona, New Mexico, western Texas, northern Mexico, and nearby mountain ranges. They shared important cultural traditions while also maintaining their own leaders, local customs, and seasonal movements. That distinction often escaped newcomers arriving from the East. Modern historical research from institutions including Harvard University emphasizes that Apache societies were highly adaptable rather than isolated. Their survival depended upon flexibility, extensive environmental knowledge, family alliances, and careful mobility across enormous distances. Those qualities would later become decisive during years of conflict, although very few American officials fully appreciated them in 1849. For now, however, you see no battlefield. Instead, you see ordinary life. The morning begins with careful preparation. Fires warm simple meals. Families repair clothing worn by long travel. Children play beneath scattered trees while older relatives quietly observe the changing weather. Every action reflects practical experience accumulated across countless seasons. Nearby, several riders prepare to leave before sunrise. They travel lightly because speed matters. Heavy possessions slow movement. The desert rewards efficiency and punishes unnecessary weight. Across another valley, traders arrive carrying woven goods, metal tools, livestock, and stories gathered from distant settlements. Information moves almost as valuable as supplies. A single conversation can reveal changing conditions hundreds of miles away. You continue walking. The land itself becomes another character within the story. Tall cliffs glow orange beneath the rising sun. Narrow washes twist across the desert floor like forgotten pathways. Small patches of green suddenly appear wherever hidden water reaches the surface. Birds briefly fill the silence before soaring toward higher ground. It almost feels peaceful, Yet change already approaches, far away, beyond these mountains. Remarkable events are transforming North America. News spreads rapidly that extraordinary amounts of gold have been discovered in California. Thousands of hopeful travelers prepare wagons, gather animals, and leave established homes behind. Many believe unimaginable wealth waits just beyond the western horizon. Most have little understanding of the lands lying between. The routes leading toward California cross territories already occupied by native peoples whose own histories stretch back centuries. Few travelers recognize that every shortcut, every river crossing, and every mountain pass already carries meaning for someone else. Paper maps tell only part of the story. Living landscapes tell the rest. As more emigrants begin moving west, pressure slowly increases upon resources that had always remained carefully balanced. Water becomes more valuable. Grazing land becomes more contested. Hunting grounds experience greater disturbance. None of these changes happen overnight, yet together they begin altering daily life. Historians continue debating exactly how quickly these early pressures transformed relations across the Southwest. Some argue that conflict became inevitable almost immediately after large migration increased. Others believe local cooperation remained possible in many regions before later misunderstandings hardened attitudes. Surviving records offer valuable evidence, yet they also reveal how differently various witnesses remembered the same years. You pause beside a shallow stream. The water moves quietly around polished stones before disappearing beneath thick reeds farther downstream. You kneel and notice how precious every drop feels in this dry country. A family filling water containers works without wasted movement. Nothing here encourages excess. The environment teaches discipline. It also teaches humility. A traveller who ignores the landscape rarely travels far. As evening returns, smoke rises gently from scattered camps. Meals remain simple. Conversation stays unhurried. Someone quietly repairs worn leather while another checks saddle straps one final time before darkness settles completely. These small routines rarely appear inside dramatic history books, yet they shape survival far more than grand speeches. You begin realizing that history often begins almost invisibly. Large wars rarely appear without smaller moments first. A conversation misunderstood, a trail unexpectedly crowded, a frightened traveller, a missing horse, a decision made during exhaustion rather than patience. Each moment seems insignificant alone. Together they gradually reshape entire regions. The American government now controls vast new territories following the recent war with Mexico. Officials in distant offices study maps covered with straight lines and official boundaries. On paper, authority appears simple. Reality proves much more complicated. Many communities living across these lands recognize older relationships instead of newly established borders. Families continue traveling traditional routes regardless of changing political agreements. Traders cross invisible lines without considering them especially important. Mountains care little about governments. Neither do deserts. The coming years will reveal how difficult it becomes when two very different ways of understanding land meet each other. One side increasingly measures ownership through surveys and legal documents. The other understands belonging through generations of lived experience, seasonal movement, and shared responsibility. The perspective disappears easily. Both believe themselves justified. You feel the cool night settling once again across the desert. Stars emerge one after another until the sky appears crowded with silent light. The campfire burns lower. Horses rest peacefully nearby. Somewhere beyond the darkness, unseen travelers continue moving beneath the same stars toward uncertain futures. The Great Apache Wars have not truly begun. Not yet, but the frontier has already started changing. Quietly, patiently, almost without anyone fully noticing. And that is often how history begins. Your mind drifts westward with the slow movement of a wagon train that seems almost too small for the enormous landscape surrounding it. Wooden wheels creak across dry ground. Leather harnesses stretch under steady pressure. Oxen lower their heads with patient determination, while families glance toward distant mountains that appear no closer after hours of travel. The morning air feels cool. Yet everyone knows the afternoon sun will soon turn the open trail into a test of endurance. The California gold rush has become more than exciting news. It has become a powerful force that quietly reshapes an entire continent. During the winter of 1848, reports of gold discovered near Sutter's Mill spread slowly at first. Many people dismissed the earlier stories as exaggerations. Then merchants, sailors, newspaper editors, and travellers carried confirmation farther east. By 1849, thousands of hopeful men and families abandoned ordinary lives to chase extraordinary dreams. The world suddenly feels smaller, and the frontier feels much busier. Modern historians at Stanford University have noted that the gold rush created one of the largest voluntary migrations in 19th century American history. The movement reached far beyond California itself. It transformed transportation, commerce, government planning, and relations with native peoples across much of western North America. Even places where no gold existed experienced profound change because so many travelers passed through them. You watch another wagon appear on the horizon, then another. Soon the empty trail no longer feels empty. Some travelers carry everything they own inside heavy wagons packed with furniture, cooking pots, blankets, books, and hopeful expectations. Others ride horseback with little more than food, ammunition, simple tools, and confidence. Every group believes that careful preparation will overcome whatever waits ahead. Many preparations prove insufficient. Maps remain incomplete. Distances are misunderstood. Water sources marked during wet seasons sometimes disappear entirely during dry months. Grass expected for livestock may already have been consumed by earlier travelers. Rivers become dangerous after sudden storms far upstream. Every mile teaches humility. You notice the smell of damp canvas as morning dew slowly disappears beneath growing sunlight. Someone hangs clothing across a wagon to dry after an unexpected night shower. Nearby, children chase each other around stacked barrels while adults quietly inspect broken wheel spokes. Small repairs never end. The trail itself becomes a demanding companion. For many emigrants, Apache country exists only as a phrase spoken around campfires. Rumors travel faster than facts. One traveler claims every canyon hides danger. Another insists peaceful passage is almost guaranteed. Few possess first-hand experience. Most repeat stories heard from strangers met only days earlier. Fear quietly grows, sometimes without evidence, sometimes with reason. Accounts from surviving journals reveal that uncertainty weighed heavily upon emigrants. Long before seeing any Apache people, many travelers already expected conflict because alarming stories circulated from camp to camp. Those stories changed with every retelling until separating truth from imagination became nearly impossible. Historians still debate how much these rumors shaped later encounters. Some scholars argue that exaggerated fears encouraged unnecessary suspicion before meetings even occurred. Others suggest genuine risks existed, but became magnified through repeated storytelling. Contemporary diaries preserve both caution and exaggeration, making simple conclusions difficult. You continue walking beside the wagons. The road narrows between rocky hills. Wind carries fine dust into every fold of clothing. Your boots collect another layer of pale soil. Even the strongest travelers begin conserving energy beneath the afternoon heat. Conversation becomes quieter. Water becomes more valuable than comfort. One family carefully counts every remaining barrel. Another worries about livestock already showing signs of exhaustion. A young boy studies animal tracks crossing the trail while his father wonders whether they belong to deer or something less welcome. Every observation suddenly matters. Far ahead, experienced guides search for reliable campsites. They understand that choosing the wrong location can invite unnecessary hardship. Shade matters, fresh water matters, visibility matters. A pleasant campsite may actually expose sleeping families to flash floods or leave animals without grazing. Experience cannot be rushed, it must be earned. Meanwhile, Apache communities observe the changing trails with growing concern. For generations, movement through these lands has followed familiar seasonal patterns. Travelers have always existed, including traders from New Spain, Mexico, and native neighbors. Yet the scale now changes dramatically. Hundreds become thousands. Temporary crossings become constant movement. Animals consume grass near precious springs. Firewood disappears around heavily travelled camps. Hunting becomes more difficult where wildlife avoids noisy wagon trains. Resources once carefully shared across seasons begin experiencing unfamiliar pressure. No single moment creates conflict. Instead, countless small changes slowly accumulate. You pause beneath the welcome shade of a cottonwood tree beside a narrow stream. Cool water slips quietly over smooth stones. Dragonflies hover above the surface while horses drink deeply after a difficult morning. The brief silence feels almost sacred. Then another wagon train arrives. The peaceful resting place quickly becomes crowded. Simple needs begin competing. The emigrants rarely intend harm. Most simply wish to survive their own difficult journey. They think about reaching California before winter closes mountain passes. They worry about illness, broken wagons, and dwindling supplies. Their attention focuses almost entirely forward. Apache families look at the same landscape differently. This valley is not merely a stopping point. It belongs within a much larger network of familiar places connected through memory. Seasonal travel, hunting, gathering, and family relationships stretching back generations. Both groups see the same stream. Each understands it differently. Research from the University of California has emphasized that environmental resources across the Southwest remained finely balanced long before large-scale American migration. Reliable water sources, grazing areas, and travel corridors carried exceptional importance. Increased traffic after 1849 placed new pressures upon those fragile systems even before organized military expansion accelerated. The afternoon slowly fades. Golden light settles across distant cliffs. Campfires begin appearing one after another until tiny columns of smoke rise across the valley like silent signals. A woman quietly stirs a pot of simple soup while tired children fall asleep before finishing supper. A blacksmith travelling with the wagon train spends another evening repairing cracked iron fittings. Nearby, a violin produces a gentle melody that briefly softens everyone's worries. For a few moments, the frontier almost feels welcoming. Yet beyond the firelight, experienced Apache scouts quietly observe unfamiliar movement through lands their families know intimately. They count wagons, they study livestock. They notice where travelers camp and how long they remain. Observation requires patience. Action comes later. Most encounters during these early months remain peaceful or avoid direct contact altogether. People often pass one another at considerable distance. Curiosity exists on both sides. So does caution. Neither side fully understands the other. Misunderstanding often begins long before conversation. As darkness settles completely, stars fill the immense desert sky. The same constellations guide emigrants toward California, while Apache travelers use generations of knowledge to navigate mountains, valleys, and hidden springs. Different journeys unfold beneath identical heavens. The gold itself remains hundreds of miles away. Yet its influence already reaches this quiet frontier, not through shining nuggets, through movement, through expectation, through thousands of footsteps slowly crossing lands that will never remain quite the same again. The conflict has not fully arrived, but history is steadily walking toward it, one wagon at a time, for a moment. It feels as though the land itself is trying to explain something. You stand upon a broad ridge where the morning light slowly spills across valleys, mesas, and winding rivers that disappear beyond the horizon. Nothing about the view suggests sharp divisions. There are no painted lines across the desert. No fences stretch from mountain to mountain. The earth simply rises and falls according to its own ancient design. Yet people increasingly arrive carrying maps that insist invisible boundaries exist. You unfold one of those paper maps beside a small campfire. The parchment crackles softly in your hands. Rivers appear as neat blue lines. Mountain ranges form tidy shapes. Newly acquired territories are outlined with confidence. Looking at the drawing, everything appears organized. Then you raise your eyes. The real landscape refuses such simplicity. The Southwest during the early 1850s is a place where several different ideas of land exist at the same time. The United States has recently gained enormous territories following the war with Mexico. Government officials began planning surveys, military roads, and administrative districts. on official documents. These lands seem ready to become orderly parts of an expanding nation. But the people already living here understand the country differently. Apache communities recognize mountains, springs, valleys, and hunting grounds through generations of lived experience rather than legal boundaries. Certain routes are traveled during particular seasons. Some valleys provide shelter during harsh weather. Hidden water sources become precious knowledge shared carefully within families. The landscape is remembered through use, memory, and survival. Neither understanding is imaginary. They simply speak different languages of belonging. Historical research supported by scholars at Yale University has emphasized that many frontier conflicts emerge not only from competition over resources, but also from fundamentally different concepts of land ownership and territorial responsibility. American officials generally viewed surveyed boundaries as permanent expressions of authority. Many native communities understood land through long-established patterns of use, kinship, and seasonal movement that could not easily be translated onto government maps. You continue walking across dry ground where scattered stones crunch beneath your boots. The smell of warm dust rises gently with every step. Small desert flowers somehow bloom between rocks that appear completely lifeless. Their quiet resilience almost escapes your attention. Nearby, a surveying party pauses to measure distance. One man carefully adjusts his instruments while another records numbers inside a leather notebook. Every measurement feels important. Every line drawn today may influence future settlements, roads, or military decisions. They work with concentration. They also work with limited understanding. Few surveyors possess detailed knowledge of local geography beyond their immediate assignments. Fewer still understand how native communities move across these same landscapes throughout the changing seasons. A straight line upon paper may cross an ancient travel corridor. A planned road may pass beside a spring relied upon for generations. No one intends every consequence. Many simply remain unseen. As the afternoon grows warmer, you encounter a small trading camp where several cultures briefly meet. American merchants unload cloth, metal tools, flour, and coffee. Mexican traders discuss livestock prices. Native visitors examine goods with careful attention rather than hurried excitement. Trade often succeeds where politics struggles. People smile cautiously. Hands exchange practical necessities. For a little while, commerce creates a fragile bridge between unfamiliar worlds. The conversations remain brief because language differences require patience. Gestures become almost as important as words. A respectful tone matters. A careless movement can create misunderstanding where none previously existed. You notice an elderly trader taking extra time before every exchange. He never rushes. He listens more than he speaks. Years upon the frontier have taught him that patience often proves more valuable than confidence. His example feels wise. Not everyone follows it. Farther along the trail, another group of newcomers speaks loudly about land they expect to claim. They discuss fertile valleys as though nobody already depends upon them. Their excitement is genuine. So is their ignorance. You cannot entirely blame them. Many have travelled thousands of difficult miles believing opportunity waits wherever they stop. Government encouragement, newspaper stories, and conversations back home have painted the frontier as a place of open possibility. Few descriptions mention the complicated human history already woven into every canyon and river. The silence between those different expectations slowly grows heavier. Historians continue debating whether better communication during these early years could have reduced later violence. Some researchers believe more experienced frontier diplomacy might have prevented several local disputes from escalating. Others argue that expanding migration and competing economic interests made sustained peace increasingly difficult regardless of individual efforts. Surviving correspondence offers evidence supporting both interpretations. The afternoon breeze strengthens. It carries the dry fragrance of juniper across the hills. Your canteen feels lighter with every passing hour. You instinctively begin watching the terrain for signs of water, just as countless travellers have done before you. A cluster of greener trees catches your attention. Soon you hear the quiet sound of flowing water hidden beneath reeds. Relief arrives immediately. Simple pleasures become unforgettable here. A cool drink, a patch of shade, a chance to remove dusty boots for a few peaceful minutes. Nearby, several Apache riders approach the spring without visible alarm. They remain alert but calm, leading their horses with practiced confidence. Their movements reveal familiarity rather than hesitation. They know exactly where water lies, even when outsiders might search for hours. Knowledge itself becomes a form of wealth. It cannot be carried inside wagons. It lives inside memory, across the valley. An American officer studies the same landscape through different eyes. He considers possible routes for supply wagons and patrols. He wonders where forts might eventually stand. His responsibility requires thinking about logistics rather than family traditions. Neither man sees the entire picture. Both observe only part of a much larger reality. As evening approaches, long shadows stretch across the desert floor. The heat finally begins releasing its grip. Horses graze quietly among scattered grasses while smoke rises from cooking fires. Someone repairs a torn blanket with steady hands. Another carefully oils a rifle that has gathered fine dust during the day's travel. Ordinary routines continue. History often hides inside ordinary moments. No battle has yet defined these years. No famous commander dominates the frontier. Instead, countless individuals make practical decisions shaped by incomplete information, personal hopes, inherited traditions, and daily necessity. Those decisions slowly accumulate. A survey marker placed today, a campsite chosen tomorrow, a trail widened next month. Each appears insignificant when viewed alone. Together, they begin reshaping an entire region. The sky gradually darkens until the first stars appear above the mountains. You look once more across the vast country where no visible border divides one world from another. Only people attempt such divisions. The land remains unchanged, for now, in your ears. The echo changes into the gentle sound of children laughing somewhere beyond a stand of tall cottonwood trees. The laughter rises for only a few moments before blending into the steady whisper of wind moving across the valley. It is such an ordinary sound that you almost forget where you are. Before there are famous campaigns, military columns, or widely remembered battles. There are families, there are children learning from parents, there are elders sharing stories beside evening fires. There are ordinary days that history too often overlooks. You leave the dusty trail behind and quietly enter the rhythm of Apache daily life during the years before widespread war reshapes the frontier. The morning begins long before sunrise. The air feels surprisingly cold. Thin frost clings to patches of grass near a small spring sheltered beneath steep canyon walls. Smoke rises slowly from carefully tended fires as breakfast is prepared. The scent of roasting meat mixes with wood smoke, creating a comforting warmth against the cool mountain air. No one wastes movement. Every task serves a purpose. Some family members prepare for hunting. Others gather edible plants that change with each season. Young people help carry water, while older relatives repair clothing, sharpen tools, or inspect horses before the day's travel. Nothing appears hurried. Life follows the seasons rather than clocks. Apache communities are remarkably diverse. Different bands adapt to different landscapes across mountains, deserts, forests, and river valleys. Some regions provide richer hunting opportunities. Others require longer seasonal travel to reach dependable water or useful plant resources. Flexibility becomes one of the greatest strengths shared across many Apache groups. Research supported by the University of Chicago has emphasized that Apache survival depended upon sophisticated environmental knowledge accumulated through centuries of observation, rather than wandering without direction. Families followed carefully understood seasonal patterns that balanced hunting, gathering, trading, and movement across familiar territories. You watch a grandmother teaching two young children how to recognize useful plants growing among scattered rocks. She kneels patiently, allowing tiny hands to touch leaves before explaining which roots provide food and which should remain untouched. The lesson feels simple. It is actually essential. A mistake here carries real consequences. Nearby, several older boys practice riding horses across uneven ground. Their instructors encourage confidence without recklessness. Horses are companions as much as valuable possessions. A skilled rider travels farther, hunts more effectively, and responds more quickly when danger appears. The relationship grows through trust, not force. Elsewhere, hunters quietly prepare for the day's journey, weapons receive careful inspection, leather straps are tightened. Water containers are checked one final time before leaving camp. Every person understands that preparation reduces unnecessary risk. The mountains reward attention. They rarely forgive carelessness. As sunlight reaches the valley floor, daily work spreads naturally across the landscape. Women gather food, prepare hides, weave useful materials, and care for younger children. Men hunt, scout, trade, or travel according to immediate needs. Elders advise, observe, and preserve memories that younger generations will eventually inherit. Responsibility belongs to everyone. Even children contribute according to their abilities. You notice one little girl proudly carrying a bundle of firewood, almost too large for her small arms. An older brother quietly removes several branches without embarrassing her. She smiles with quiet determination before continuing toward camp. It is a tiny moment, yet it reveals the importance of family cooperation. No one survives alone for long in this country. The landscape itself shapes every decision. Afternoon heat can become exhausting even during moderate seasons. Water sources determine travel routes. Mountain storms appear with little warning. Winds change direction unexpectedly, carrying dust across valleys that seemed perfectly clear only moments earlier. Nature constantly participates. It never becomes mere scenery. The smell of wet earth suddenly fills the air after a brief rain passes across nearby hills. Tiny streams begin flowing where dry washes existed only hours before. Children rush outside to watch water dancing across smooth stones, while adults quietly evaluate how long the moisture might last. Every rainfall matters, especially here. Trade also remains an important part of Apache life. Neighboring native communities exchange goods, information, and practical skills. Mexican settlements provide additional opportunities for commerce. Although relations vary according to local conditions and changing political circumstances, not every meeting becomes hostile. Many remain peaceful. Many become routine. Historical records reveal a frontier far more complex than simple conflict between clearly defined sides. Cooperation, negotiation, and trade continue alongside periods of tension. Relationships differ greatly from one valley to another, and from one year to the next. Historians still debate how centralized Apache leadership actually was during these decades. Many scholars emphasize that local leaders exercised influence through personal respect, experience, and demonstrated ability rather than absolute command over every community. Other researchers suggest broader alliances occasionally emerge during periods of shared danger. The surviving evidence supports both local independence and practical cooperation depending upon particular circumstances. You continue walking toward a shaded campsite where several respected elders sit together beneath tall trees. Conversation flows slowly. No one interrupts. Important decisions require listening before speaking. Leadership here depends heavily upon reputation earned through wisdom, courage, generosity, and sound judgment. A respected leader cannot simply demand obedience. Trust develops over years of consistent behavior. Families choose whom they will follow because confidence must be deserved. Authority feels personal, not distant, not anonymous. As evening approaches, hunters begin returning one by one. Some carry game, others return with a little success. No one expects every hunt to end well. Experience teaches patience as naturally as persistence. A simple meal is shared, smoke drifts upward into the cooling air. Someone begins telling an old family story remembered from earlier generations. Children gather close enough to hear every word. The storyteller pauses often, allowing listeners to imagine each scene before continuing. Knowledge travels through memory. Stories become classrooms. Across the mountains, however, change steadily approaches. More emigrant trails become active. More survey parties appear. More military patrols begin exploring unfamiliar regions. Most Apache families know little about decisions being made in distant government offices. They measure change through practical observation instead. More strangers pass nearby. Hunting becomes less predictable around busy trails. Familiar camping places sometimes contain unexpected visitors. The differences remain gradual, but they continue growing. You sit quietly beside the fading fire as darkness settles across the valley. Sparks drift upward toward a sky crowded with stars. Somewhere nearby, a baby falls asleep against a mother's shoulder. An elder gently adds another piece of wood to the fire without speaking. Peace still exists tonight. Tomorrow remains uncertain. The people around you cannot foresee the full scale of events that will unfold during the coming decades. Neither can the settlers steadily entering the southwest. Both communities still hope for ordinary futures. History, however, is already beginning to move beneath their feet, as quietly as the evening wind passing through the canyon. Your attention slowly turns toward a distant line of riders emerging through the pale morning haze. At first, they appear as little more than moving shadows against the wide desert floor. As the sun climbs higher, blue uniforms begin to catch the light. Leather saddles creak softly with every step. Metal buckles flash briefly before disappearing beneath drifting dust. Their pace is steady rather than hurried, and their expressions reveal more uncertainty than confidence. The American frontier is quietly changing again, not through a great battle, through arrival. The United States has only recently acquired these vast southwestern territories. Government officials now face an enormous challenge. Maps show thousands of square miles that officially belong to the nation, yet very few American soldiers have ever traveled through much of this country. Even fewer understand the climate, the geography, or the communities already living here. Distance itself becomes an obstacle. Washington feels unimaginably far away. Orders issued in eastern offices may require months before reaching isolated military detachments scattered across the southwest. By the time instructions arrive, local circumstances have often changed completely. You walk beside one of these small military columns. Their uniforms are already dusty despite leaving their previous camp only a few days earlier. Heavy wool coats, practical during colder eastern winters, feel uncomfortable beneath the growing desert sun. Some soldiers quietly loosen collars whenever officers are not looking. Others wipe sweat from their faces before adjusting equipment that never seems to grow lighter. The frontier teaches lessons quickly. Comfort disappears first. Most of these young men have never seen landscapes like this before. They recognize forests, rivers, and cultivated farmland from home. Here they discover endless mesas, thorny shrubs, dry washes, and mountains rising unexpectedly from open desert. Nothing resembles familiar territory. Even the silence feels different. Research from Princeton University has noted that early American military operations in the Southwest suffered from limited geographical knowledge and difficult supply conditions. Officers frequently depended upon local guides, traders, or experienced scouts because official maps remained incomplete, and reliable information often arrived too late to prove useful. You notice one lieutenant studying a folded map while repeatedly comparing it with the surrounding hills. The drawing offers only broad outlines. Reality contains countless details. A canyon marked as a simple line may actually contain steep cliffs impossible for wagons to cross. A stream shown confidently upon paper may have dried weeks earlier. A shortcut imagined by distant planners may become an exhausting detour lasting several days. The landscape quietly resists certainty. Nearby, civilian surveyors travel with another expedition. Their work appears less dramatic than the military patrols, yet its consequences may ultimately prove just as important. They measure rivers, identify potential roadways, examine mountain passes, and estimate future settlement opportunities. Each measurement becomes part of a growing national vision. Roads will follow. Towns may appear later. The surveyors move carefully across rocky ground, carrying delicate instruments protected inside wooden cases. Every evening they compare notes beneath lantern light while carefully recording distances, elevations, and natural landmarks. Their notebooks slowly transform unfamiliar country into organized information. At least that is the goal. A gentle breeze carries the smell of sun-warmed leather mixed with dry grass. Several pack mules pause beside a shallow creek while soldiers refill water barrels. The cool splash of fresh water briefly lifts everyone's spirits. Faces soften, conversation becomes easier. Simple comforts feel extraordinary here. One soldier removes his boots for a few moments and quietly rubs sore feet before the march resumes. Another writes a short letter he knows cannot be delivered for many weeks. He describes strange mountains, endless skies, and the hope that his family remains healthy back home. Loneliness travels with every expedition. So does curiosity. Many soldiers honestly wish to understand the country surrounding them. They ask traders about local trails. They question experienced mountain guides about weather patterns. Some even attempt learning a few practical words from interpreters whenever opportunities arise. Others remain less patient. Assumptions often replace understanding. The frontier rewards careful observation, but impatience sometimes arrives before knowledge. You continue walking until the military column encounters a small group of local settlers already attempting to establish farms near a river. Their cabins appear modest. Freshly cut logs still smell of green timber. Small fields have only recently been planted. Life remains difficult. Success is far from guaranteed. The settlers eagerly ask soldiers about security along nearby trails. Soldiers ask settlers about water conditions and grazing opportunities. Both groups exchange information because each depends upon the other. Across the valley, Apache families quietly notice these new permanent structures. A temporary camp eventually disappears. A cabin usually remains. The distinction matters. Seasonal travelers come and go. Permanent settlement changes the land itself. Historical records show that many early military officers did not immediately expect prolonged warfare. Their assignments often emphasize protecting emigrant routes, establishing communication, and demonstrating federal authority, rather than launching large campaigns. Conditions would gradually shift as local incidents multiplied and distrust deepened. Historians continue debating whether stronger frontier diplomacy during these early years might have delayed broader conflict. Some scholars point towards successful negotiations achieved in isolated regions, where experienced intermediaries earned trust on both sides. Others argue that expanding settlement created pressures too great for limited agreements to withstand over time. The surviving evidence remains complex rather than absolute. The afternoon grows hotter. Heat rises from sun-baked stones until the air itself seems to shimmer. Flies gather around resting animals. Horses lower their heads while waiting patiently beside supply wagons. A canteen passed from hand to hand receives careful attention because every remaining sip matters. You feel sweat collecting beneath your collar. The dry wind quickly carries it away. Exhaustion settles quietly rather than dramatically. One officer pauses beside a high overlook and studies the immense country stretching toward the horizon. Somewhere beyond those distant ridges lie communities he has never visited, and responsibilities he only partly understands. He realizes something important. Holding territory upon paper differs greatly from knowing it in practice. The same realization slowly reaches many newcomers entering the southwest. Evening finally offers relief. The sun slips behind rugged mountains, leaving broad bands of orange light across the western sky. Campfires appear one after another as soldiers unpack simple cooking pots and hard bread. Someone brews coffee over glowing coals while another carefully mends torn saddle leather. The day's march is finished. Tomorrow another begins, far beyond the circle of firelight. Experienced Apache scouts continue moving quietly across familiar ridges. They observe fresh wagon tracks, newly marked survey points, and military camps that did not exist only months earlier. No one fully understands what these changes will eventually become, yet each arrival leaves another lasting mark upon the frontier. The conflict still advances slowly, not with thunder, with footsteps, with maps, with camps, and with the steady belief that tomorrow will resemble today. Even as the southwest is changing one quiet mile at a time, your mind drifts toward a narrow trail winding between weathered cliffs where every turn seems to reveal another stretch of country waiting in complete silence. The path is little more than two faint lines pressed into the earth by countless hooves and wagon wheels. It does not appear impressive, yet this modest trail carries hopes, fears, supplies, and misunderstandings across hundreds of miles. The frontier is increasingly connected by roads that are not really roads at all. Only paths, only possibilities. The morning begins before first light. Campfires glow softly beneath a sky still filled with fading stars. Travellers move quietly so they do not wake sleeping children too soon. Coffee boils inside blackened pots. Harnesses are checked one final time. Oxen are coaxed into position with patient voices rather than sharp commands. Everyone understands that daylight is precious. The farther the wagon train travels before the afternoon heat arrives, the better. You fall into step beside one family that has already spent months crossing the continent. Their wagon carries fewer possessions than when they first departed. Broken furniture has been abandoned. Heavy trunks proved unnecessary. Every mile has taught them that survival favours simplicity. The mother carefully folds a worn blanket before placing it beside sacks of flour. Her hands move automatically after repeating the same routine every morning for weeks. A small boy quietly feeds scraps of grain to two tired mules while his younger sister watches the sunrise paint distant cliffs with soft gold. These ordinary moments feel comforting. They also conceal constant uncertainty. Every traveller worries about different dangers. Some fear disease spreading through crowded camps. Others fear broken wheels or exhausted livestock. Still others worry about running out of water before reaching the next dependable spring. The landscape decides which concern becomes most urgent. Research from the University of California has shown that overland migration demanded careful planning because reliable water sources across the southwest could be separated by many difficult miles. Experienced guides often determine daily travel according to springs and seasonal streams rather than simple distance. You soon understand why. The trail climbs steadily toward higher ground. Dust rises beneath every wagon wheel, coating boots, clothing, and faces with a pale layer that seems impossible to remove. Even conversation becomes quieter because breathing through the dry air requires effort. Then someone points ahead. Water! Relief spreads almost instantly through the entire caravan. The spring is modest. Little more than clear water flowing from rocks beneath a cluster of cottonwood trees. Yet to weary travellers it appears almost miraculous. Horses drink deeply. Children laugh while splashing cool water across tired faces. Adults refill every available container before anyone thinks about resting. No one wastes this opportunity. Tomorrow's water remains uncertain. Not far away, hidden among rocky slopes, Apache scouts quietly observe the growing movement along the trail. They notice details that newcomers rarely consider. Which wagons carry livestock, which animals appear exhausted, which travellers seem experienced, which camps remain disciplined after sunset. Observation comes naturally. The country rewards careful eyes. Most of these scouts do not immediately seek confrontation. Information itself carries enormous value. Knowing who passes through familiar valleys allows communities to prepare for changing conditions. Avoid unnecessary encounters, or approach strangers when trade seems possible. Distance often prevents direct contact. Curiosity remains, so does caution. Many emigrants, meanwhile, rarely distinguish between different native communities. To inexperienced eyes, every unfamiliar rider appears part of a single unknown world. This misunderstanding quietly shapes expectations long before anyone exchanges a single word. Fear often grows from uncertainty. Uncertainty grows from ignorance. Historical journals reveal that countless wagon trains crossed portions of Apache country without violence. Others experienced theft, tense meetings, or frightening rumors that spread rapidly between camps. Every story became another piece of frontier folklore, sometimes accurate, sometimes greatly exaggerated after repeated retelling. Historians continue debating how much these travel narratives influence public opinion in the eastern United States. Some researchers argue that sensational newspaper accounts encouraged greater military involvement by emphasizing danger. Others suggest private diaries reveal a more balanced reality, where peaceful encounters remained common despite growing tension. Surviving records preserve both impressions. The trail narrows again. Steep canyon walls rise on either side until sunlight reaches the ground only in scattered patches. Cool air lingers here despite the approaching afternoon. The smell of damp stone replaces the scent of dry dust for a welcome stretch of the journey. Every traveller instinctively lowers their voice. The canyon seems to listen. A guide riding near the front raises one hand, signalling everyone to remain alert. Not because danger is certain, but because narrow passages leave little room for unexpected surprises. Wagons move more slowly. Horses step carefully over loose rocks. Patience becomes another form of protection. Emerging from the canyon, the train enters open grassland where distant antelope graze without concern for a few peaceful minutes. The frontier appears almost limitless. Wind ripples across tall grasses like waves moving over quiet water. Then dark clouds begin gathering beyond the mountains. A summer storm arrives with remarkable speed. Rain falls heavily for only a short time, yet dry washes suddenly transform into fast-moving streams. Travellers scramble to secure supplies beneath canvas covers. Children help gather loose equipment before the wind carries it away. The storm passes as quickly as it arrived. Fresh earth fills the air with a rich scent. Mud now clings stubbornly to wagon wheels. Nature changes the trail within minutes. As evening approaches, camp is established beside a broad meadow. Animals graze while cooks prepare simple meals of beans, bread, and dried meat. Someone quietly plays a fiddle beside the fire. The familiar melody eases weary minds after another demanding day. Across the same valley, Apache families also prepare evening meals. Children gather close to elders. Stories return with the darkness. Different communities share the same sunset. They simply experience it from different camps. A respected trader visiting the emigrants quietly reminds several newcomers that the safest frontier often depends upon respect rather than bravado. He advises them not to disturb grazing animals unnecessarily, not to waste water, and not to assume every unfamiliar rider intends harm. Some listen carefully, others dismiss his advice. The frontier will eventually judge which attitude proves wiser. The stars slowly emerge one by one above the quiet desert. Wagon wheels stand motionless for the night. Horses breathe softly behind rope lines. The fire settles into glowing embers while tired families drift towards sleep. Tomorrow the trail continues. So does the slow meeting of two very different worlds. Neither fully understands the other. Yet every mile travelled brings them a little closer to moments that neither side can easily avoid. The conflict has not fully erupted, but the roads leading toward it grow busier with every passing season. Your thoughts settle upon a lonely rise overlooking miles of open country, where the morning mist slowly lifts from scattered valleys. The silence feels almost complete until the distant sound of hammers begins drifting through the cool air. Each steady strike echoes across the hills before fading into the vastness beyond. Somewhere ahead, men are building something meant to last. A frontier fort is beginning to take shape. Not a grand stone fortress, only a small outpost. Yet even a modest collection of the rough buildings can change the rhythm of an entire region. You walk closer. Fresh pine logs lie stacked beside shallow foundations cut into the dry earth. Wagons unload barrels of flour, crates of tools, bundles of iron nails, and coils of rope. Soldiers remove heavy timbers one by one, while civilian labourers measure the next wall with careful attention. Everything smells of newly cut wood. Fresh sap glistens beneath the rising sun. For a brief moment, the camp resembles an ordinary construction site rather than a military installation. The United States government understands that long supply routes and increasing migration require more than occasional patrols. Permanent outposts promise shelter, communication, storage, and a visible symbol of federal authority across lands that remain unfamiliar to many officials. The idea appears practical. Reality proves more complicated. Research from Columbia University has shown that early frontier forts often served multiple purposes beyond defense. They protected supply routes, stored provisions, supported survey expeditions, provided temporary medical care, carried government correspondence, and offered resting places for travellers moving across enormous distances. You notice how small the garrison actually is. Only a handful of officers, several dozen enlisted men, a few civilian workers. From a distance, the fort may appear powerful. Up close, it feels surprisingly vulnerable. The surrounding country stretches endlessly beyond the unfinished walls. Rugged mountains stand only a day's ride away. Hidden canyons disappear into landscapes that soldiers barely know. The land remains much larger than the fort. It always will. A young lieutenant studies the construction with quiet satisfaction. He imagines that stronger buildings will create greater stability. A dependable supply depot means patrols can travel farther. A permanent flagstaff announces that the government intends to remain. His confidence is sincere. His understanding is still developing. Many officers arriving during these early years possess professional military training, but little experience with the Southwest itself. They know discipline, organization, and logistics. They do not yet know the countless details that local guides consider ordinary. The desert has its own rules. The mountains have their own memory. You step inside one of the unfinished barracks. Sunlight enters through open walls where windows will eventually stand. Rough timber floors creak beneath heavy boots. Soldiers carry simple wooden bunks into place, while another group assembles tables for eating and writing reports. Nothing feels luxurious. Everything feels necessary. Outside. A blacksmith has already established a small forge beneath a canvas shelter. The smell of hot iron mixes with wood smoke as horseshoes are repaired one after another. Every wagon eventually requires maintenance. Every patrol depends upon healthy horses. The forge quickly becomes one of the busiest places in camp. Metal never rests for long on the frontier. Nearby, cooks prepare the midday meal. Beans simmer slowly inside large iron pots. Fresh bread remains rare. So-hard biscuits accompany nearly every supper. Salted pork hangs beneath shaded awnings, while coffee boils steadily over glowing coals. The food is simple. It is also welcome. One private quietly jokes that the biscuits could probably survive another 100 years without changing shape. His companions laugh softly before returning to work. Humour eases hard days. Even brief laughter matters. As the afternoon unfolds, traders begin arriving with wagons loaded with supplies, flour, blankets, tools, ammunition, candles, and spare harnesses all pass through the fort before continuing toward isolated settlements or distant patrols. Commerce follows security. Security follows commerce. The two gradually become linked. Some local settlers welcome the growing military presence. They believe nearby soldiers may discourage theft, assist stranded travelers, and provide reassurance during uncertain times. Others worry that larger government involvement could eventually bring stricter control over daily life. Opinions differ. The frontier rarely speaks with one voice. Across the surrounding valleys, Apache communities also observe the appearance of these permanent structures. A temporary military camp eventually disappears. A fort announces permanence. Its walls communicate intentions without spoken words. Experienced Apache scouts notice more than the buildings themselves. They watch supply wagons arriving at regular intervals. They observe grazing animals kept inside protected enclosures. They estimate the number of soldiers by counting campfires after sunset. Information remains valuable. Patience remains essential. Historical records indicate that many early forts initially experienced long periods without direct fighting. Soldiers often spent far more time repairing roads, escorting wagon trains, delivering messages, and struggling with shortages than engaging in combat. Historians continue debating whether these forts reduced instability or unintentionally increased tension across the frontier. Some scholars argue that permanent outposts improved communication and protected vulnerable travelers. Others suggest their construction symbolized expanding occupation that naturally generated greater resistance. Contemporary evidence supports elements of both interpretations. The afternoon heat gradually softens. A gentle wind carries the scent of dry grass through the open gates. Horses stand quietly beneath shaded corrals, while farriers inspect tired hooves after long journeys. A carpenter carefully smooths rough timber with steady strokes, filling the air with the pleasant fragrance of fresh pine. Small details shape daily life, not dramatic moments. A soldier sits outside the infirmary writing another letter home. He describes endless blue skies, strange cactus plants, and mountains unlike anything he has ever seen. He admits that loneliness visits him more often than fear. He misses familiar voices. He misses ordinary routines. A physician nearby examines a man suffering from dehydration rather than wounds. Illness caused by heat, poor water, or exhaustion troubles the garrison far more frequently than violence during these early months. The environment remains everyone's greatest opponent. As sunset approaches, the newly raised flag catches the evening breeze above the unfinished fort. Its movement seems gentle rather than triumphant. Around it, workers continue placing logs into position, while soldiers stack supplies beneath protective roofs before darkness arrives. The work never truly ends. Neither does the frontier, beyond the fading light. Apache families continue traveling familiar routes through mountains and valleys unchanged by the new buildings below. Children still learn hidden springs. Hunters still read animal tracks across sandy ground. Elders still share memories beneath evening fires. Two different worlds now exist within sight of one another. Each believes its future will endure. Neither fully realizes how deeply their paths are beginning to intertwine. The first forts rise quietly from the dust. Soon they will become landmarks. Soon they will become meeting places. And sometimes they will become places where hope and misunderstanding stand only a few steps apart. For a little while, the morning seems almost perfectly peaceful. A cool breeze slips through scattered oak trees, carrying the scent of damp earth left behind by a night of gentle rain. Sunlight filters across the valley in long, golden bands, touching wagon tracks, grazing horses, and narrow footpaths that have connected these hills for generations. Somewhere nearby, a woodpecker taps steadily against an old tree, creating a quiet rhythm that blends naturally into the waking landscape. You begin to notice something remarkable. People from very different worlds are moving through the same country. Sometimes they meet, sometimes they carefully avoid one another, sometimes they misunderstand each other before a single word is spoken. The Southwest during the early 1850s is not a place where every encounter immediately becomes violent. Far from it. Many meetings pass quietly. Travellers exchange cautious greetings. Traders bargain over practical goods. Guides offer directions. Scouts observe from a respectful distance before continuing their journeys. History often remembers conflict. It forgets ordinary encounters. You follow a narrow trail leading toward a small trading place where several languages, customs, and traditions briefly come together. Pack animals stand patiently beneath cottonwood trees while merchants unpack woven blankets. Iron kettles, cloth, tobacco, dried food, and carefully wrapped tools. Trade begins with patience. Trust arrives more slowly. An experienced merchant greets everyone with the same calm expression. Years on the frontier have taught him that respect usually earns better results than loud confidence. He watches carefully before speaking, allowing visitors to set the rhythm of conversation. His success depends upon understanding people, not simply selling goods. Nearby, an Apache family approaches with quiet confidence. They examine metal knives whose sharp edges last longer than carefully shaped stone. They compare blankets woven in distant settlements with hides prepared through familiar methods. Every exchange becomes both practical and personal. Objects carry stories, so do the people exchanging them. Historical research from the University of Arizona has emphasized that trade networks across the Southwest connected native communities. Mexican settlements, and later American arrivals long before large military campaigns dominated the region. Commerce often created relationships that proved surprisingly durable, despite periods of political tension. You watch one elderly trader carefully weighing small items rather than rushing toward agreement. He understands that fairness today increases the chance of future business. Reputation travels quickly across the frontier. A dishonest bargain rarely stays secret. Neither does generosity. Not every visitor comes seeking commerce. Some arrive searching for information. A wagon train pauses near the trading camp after several difficult days crossing rough country. The guide quietly asks about dependable water farther west. Another traveller wonders whether mountain passes remain open after recent storms. Questions are exchanged with cautious politeness. Information becomes another valuable currency, sometimes more valuable than gold. The guide receives careful directions toward a reliable spring hidden between rocky ridges. Without that advice, The next stage of the journey might become dangerously difficult. Simple conversations save lives. They seldom appear inside dramatic history books. Across the camp, children from different backgrounds glance curiously at one another. They share the same fascination with horses, colourful cloth, and unusual tools. They smile briefly before returning to their own families. Curiosity comes naturally. Fear is usually learned. As the afternoon unfolds, another meeting develops along a narrow trail. An American military patrol encounters several Apache riders approaching from the opposite direction. Both groups slow their horses. Dust settles quietly around them. Hands remain visible. Faces remain alert. No one reaches for a weapon. No one speaks immediately. The silence lasts only a few moments, yet it feels much longer. Finally, an interpreter steps forward. His role is difficult because he must translate more than words. He must also communicate intention, respect, caution, and tone. A careless phrase may completely alter the meaning of an otherwise peaceful exchange. Interpreters carry enormous responsibility. Their work is often invisible. The conversation remains brief. Questions about nearby travel. News of weather. Information about wagon traffic. Nothing dramatic occurs. The patrol continues east. The riders continue west. Each group disappears beyond separate ridges. The meeting becomes another quiet moment almost forgotten by history. Historians continue debating how often peaceful encounters outweighed hostile ones during these early frontier years. Some scholars argue that surviving military reports naturally emphasized conflict because peaceful meetings required little official attention. Others point out that many private diaries describe cautious cooperation occurring far more frequently than later public memory suggested. The available evidence reminds us that the frontier was rarely as simple as popular legends would later portray. You continue walking toward higher ground where the afternoon wind grows cooler. From the ridge, you can see miles of open country stretching toward distant mountains. Thin trails cross the landscape like threads woven through an enormous tapestry. Every trail connects lives. Every meeting leaves some memory behind. Not all misunderstandings arise from fear. Many begin with different expectations. American newcomers often expect permanent settlements, surveyed farms, and clearly marked property lines. Apache communities continue viewing the same valleys through generations of seasonal movement, hunting traditions, and family responsibility. Neither perspective seems unusual to those living within it. Each appears completely reasonable. From the inside, the challenge begins when one understanding quietly replaces another. Research supported by the University of New Mexico has highlighted that many frontier disputes emerge gradually because communities interpreted identical actions through entirely different cultural expectations. A campsite, grazing area, or travel route could carry very different meanings depending upon the observer's experience. The afternoon light slowly softens. A shepherd guides sheep toward fresh grass beside a shallow stream. Soldiers refill canteens before continuing their patrol. Traders count remaining supplies beneath canvas awnings. Apache hunters return from the hills carrying modest success after a long day's work. Everyone grows tired. Everyone prepares for evening. Smoke begins rising from scattered camps across the valley. The smell of roasting meat drifts gently through cooling air. Someone quietly repairs a cracked saddle. Another sharpens a worn knife with slow, practiced movements. Ordinary work continues. Life rarely pauses for history. As darkness approaches, an elderly traveller shares gentle advice with younger emigrants gathered around the fire. He reminds them to greet strangers with calm voices, to avoid wasting water, to respect local knowledge whenever it is offered. Some lessons require experience. Others simply require humility. The stars gradually appear overhead until the entire sky seems filled with silent light. Somewhere beyond the hills, another campfire glows where Apache families gather beneath the same heavens. Their conversations differ, yet their hopes remain familiar. Safety, food, family, tomorrow. The frontier still offers opportunities for understanding. It also carries growing opportunities for misunderstanding. Both continue walking side by side. Neither yet knows which path will prove stronger. Your attention settles upon a broad valley where the first light of dawn slowly brushes across tall grasses still heavy with cool morning dew. A gentle breeze stirs the tops of cottonwood trees beside a winding creek. The air carries the fresh scent of damp soil mixed with distant wood smoke. For a few peaceful moments, the country seems untouched by conflict. Then you notice something missing. Several horses are gone. A few cattle have disappeared during the night. No one yet knows exactly what happened. The discovery spreads quietly through the camp before sunrise. Men walk carefully around the edge of the grazing area, studying hoof prints pressed into the soft earth. Women count the remaining animals while children watch silently, sensing that something important has changed. No one speaks loudly. Questions arrive before answers. Livestock means survival on the frontier. Horses pull wagons, carry riders, transport supplies, and make long journeys possible. Cattle provide food, trade, and future security. Losing even a handful of animals can threaten an entire expedition, already stretched thin by distance and limited resources. Every missing horse matters. Every track becomes significant. You kneel beside a patch of disturbed ground where experienced guides study the prints. One man quietly points towards several hoof marks leading into rough country. Another notices where the animals briefly scattered before moving together again. The trail tells a story, but only part of one. Many newcomers immediately assume Apache raiders must be responsible. Others hesitate before reaching conclusions. Animals sometimes wander away during storms. Desperate thieves from many different backgrounds travel the frontier. Mexican bandits occasionally strike isolated camps. Hungry settlers have also been known to steal livestock when survival grows desperate. The frontier rarely offers simple answers. Appearances often deceive. Historical records confirm that livestock raiding occurred across the Southwest long before the arrival of large numbers of American settlers. Horses and cattle represented wealth, transportation, and survival for many different communities. Raiding could serve economic purposes, restore previous losses, demonstrate skill, or answer earlier thefts. The motives varied greatly. So did the participants. Research from Yale University has emphasized that frontier livestock raiding cannot be understood as a single practice carried out by one group alone. The Southwest contained overlapping traditions of raiding, trading, recovery, and retaliation involving native communities, Mexican settlements, and American newcomers. Modern historians caution against reducing these complex patterns to simple stereotypes. You continue following the trail. The hoofprints disappear across rocky ground where experienced trackers move slowly, searching for broken twigs, displaced stones, and faint impressions almost invisible to unfamiliar eyes. Every small sign matters. Tracking becomes an art. Patience becomes its greatest tool. An older scout pauses beside a cactus whose broken spine reveals that animals recently brushed against it. A few yards farther on, a loose stone has been turned over, exposing darker soil beneath. Tiny clues, remarkable knowledge. Watching these trackers work, you realize how differently people learn to see the same landscape. To inexperienced travelers, the ground appears empty. To practiced observers, it contains countless details waiting to be read. Far away, an Apache family also notices unfamiliar tracks crossing one of their usual travel routes. They stop. They study. They ask similar questions. Who passed here? How many? Why? Uncertainty exists on every side. As the afternoon approaches, the missing livestock has still not been recovered. Frustration quietly replaces hope. Tempers become shorter. Conversations grow more cautious. A single unexplained loss begins changing the mood of the entire camp. Fear expands easily, especially when information remains incomplete. One young settler insists immediate pursuit is necessary. An older guide recommends waiting until the trail becomes clearer. A military officer worries that a reckless chase through unfamiliar country might create greater danger than the theft itself. No decision satisfies everyone. Leadership becomes difficult. Historians still debate how many early frontier confrontations began after uncertain accusations rather than confirmed evidence. Some scholars argue that incomplete information frequently encouraged retaliatory expeditions against the wrong communities. Others point out that many raids genuinely occurred, but later accounts often confuse separate incidents into one continuous narrative. Surviving military reports, private diaries, and local correspondence sometimes contradict one another in important details. You pause beneath the welcome shade of a large cottonwood tree. Its broad leaves whisper softly above your head while cool water flows nearby. The peaceful setting feels strangely disconnected from the growing tension spreading through the camps. Nature remains calm. People struggle. Later that afternoon, a respected frontier trader arrives after several days on the trail. He listens carefully before offering advice. He reminds everyone that not every disappearance should immediately become a military matter. Sometimes lost animals are recovered peacefully. Sometimes local leaders negotiate their return. Sometimes confusion proves greater than malice. His words carry experience, not certainty. The trader has spent years crossing the Southwest. He has witnessed successful negotiations alongside tragic misunderstandings. He understands that reputation travels quickly across the frontier. A patient response today may prevent greater hardship tomorrow. Some listeners appreciate his caution. Others believe patience appears weak. The debate itself reveals how quickly fear can divide reasonable people. Across another valley, Apache communities also experience uncertainty. Livestock wandering into unfamiliar territory can create disputes even when no theft has occurred. Stray animals blur the line between accident and intention. Families discuss how best to avoid unnecessary confrontation while protecting their own resources. Everyone seeks security. Few possess complete information. The afternoon slowly gives way to evening. Campfires begin glowing beneath the fading sky. Someone quietly repairs a broken bridle using strips of softened leather. Another counts remaining food supplies while wondering how fewer horses may affect the journey ahead. Simple arithmetic becomes unsettling. Less livestock means slower travel. Slower travel means greater risk. Nearby, a little girl asks her father whether the missing horses will find their way home. He smiles gently before answering that he hopes they will. Hope sometimes feels fragile. It still matters. As darkness settles across the valley, coyotes begin calling from distant hills. Their voices echo through the cool night air, reminding everyone that the frontier belongs to many living creatures, not only human travelers. The stars appear one by one. Silence returns. Yet beneath that silence, suspicion has quietly taken root. Not because every fear is justified, not because every accusation is false, but because uncertainty itself has become another companion on the trail. The missing horses may seem like a small event when viewed from the distance of history. For the people living through these days, however, they represent something much larger. Trust has become slightly harder to maintain. The frontier has grown a little more uneasy, and the long road toward deeper conflict continues. One unanswered question at a time. Your breathing slows as dawn spreads gently across a wide plain washed in soft silver light. A thin layer of mist lingers above the grass before the first warmth of morning begins lifting it into the clear sky. Horses stand quietly beside a shallow stream, their steady breaths forming pale clouds in the cool air. The camp has not fully awakened, yet the frontier is already alive. Somewhere beyond the hills, another camp is also stirring. Different people, different traditions, the same sunrise. You begin walking toward a cluster of military tents pitched near the edge of a newly established supply route. Soldiers emerge one by one, stretching stiff muscles after another night upon rough blankets spread across hard ground. Boots are laced, saddles are tightened. Coffee is poured into battered tin cups. No one rushes. The day ahead will be long enough. Most patrols during these early years follow familiar routines rather than dramatic campaigns. Officers receive reports from traders, settlers, guides, and neighbouring forts. They compare conflicting accounts before deciding where small detachments should travel next. Information arrives slowly. Certainty arrives even more slowly. A captain unfolds several handwritten reports across a simple wooden table inside his tent. One messenger describes missing livestock. Another reports increased wagon traffic along a southern trail. A third mentions unfamiliar riders seen near a mountain pass without recording any hostile action. The reports refuse to form a simple picture. Instead, they resemble scattered pieces of a puzzle. Research from the University of Chicago has noted that early frontier commanders often struggled because intelligence remained incomplete, delayed, and sometimes contradictory. Military decisions depended heavily upon civilian reports, local guides, and personal judgment rather than reliable communication networks. You notice the captain reading each document twice before speaking. Experience has taught him caution. Rumors possess remarkable endurance on the frontier. Facts require more patience. Outside the tent, a young lieutenant prepares a small patrol. Only a dozen soldiers will ride today. They carry enough food for several days, spare ammunition, medical supplies, and extra horseshoes. Their mission appears straightforward. Observe, escort travelers, report what they find, nothing more. The reality rarely remains so simple. You ride alongside the patrol as it leaves the fort shortly after sunrise. The trail follows a shallow valley where fresh grass still holds traces of dew. Birds dart between scattered shrubs while rabbits disappear beneath thorny bushes at the sound of approaching hooves. The country feels peaceful, almost inviting. One veteran sergeant quietly points toward distant mountains rising blue against the morning sky. He explains that newcomers often judge distance incorrectly. Those peaks appearing only a few miles away may actually require an entire day to reach. The frontier constantly deceives unfamiliar eyes. Patience becomes another survival skill. As the patrol continues, they encounter a wagon train halted beside a creek. One wheel has cracked while crossing uneven ground the previous afternoon. Several emigrants are already working together to replace damaged spokes with spare timber carried for exactly such emergencies. Life on the trail rewards preparation. Every traveler eventually learns this lesson. The officer greets the wagon master politely before asking whether the journey has remained quiet. The answer is thoughtful rather than dramatic. Mostly peaceful, some nervous nights, few clear answers. The conversation lasts only several minutes, yet both groups exchange valuable information. Which springs remain reliable? Where grass grows thickest? Which trails have become difficult after recent rain? Practical knowledge matters more than exciting stories. Farther along the route, the soldiers discover tracks crossing the main trail. The lieutenant immediately dismounts. Several riders gather around while an experienced scout studies the ground with careful concentration. Fresh horse tracks. Several riders moving west. Nothing unusual. Not every sign demands alarm. The lieutenant nods quietly before ordering the patrol onward. His restraint reflects growing experience. He understands that constant pursuit of every unfamiliar track would exhaust both men and horses without improving security. Discipline sometimes means choosing not to act. That decision can be difficult. Historians continue debating how effectively early military commanders balanced caution with restraint during these formative years. Some scholars believe experienced officers gradually recognized the dangers of overreacting to uncertain reports. Others argue that pressure from settlers and political leaders often encouraged more aggressive responses despite incomplete evidence. Surviving correspondence reveals thoughtful disagreement rather than easy conclusions. The afternoon sun climbs steadily higher. Heat begins shimmering above pale rocks. The smell of warm leather fills the air as saddles grow hot beneath constant sunlight. Flies circle around tired horses, while soldiers pause beneath scattered juniper trees for a brief meal of dried meat and hard bread. No feast awaits them, only enough to continue. One private removes his hat and quietly fans himself with a folded map. Another carefully checks his horse's hooves before offering the animal a small measure of grain saved from breakfast. Small acts of care matter. Both rider and horse depend upon one another. Not far away, Apache scouts observe the patrol from high ground hidden among weathered rocks. They remain beyond easy sight, watching the soldiers' pace, direction, and numbers. Observation answers many questions, without inviting unnecessary danger. The scouts notice something important. The patrol appears interested in protecting travelers rather than searching aggressively through the mountains. That distinction influences how local communities interpret the soldiers' presence. Intentions matter, even when imperfectly understood. As evening approaches, the patrol reaches a lonely crossroads where several trails divide across the open country. A weathered signpost points toward distant settlements. Though wind and sun have already faded much of the lettering, here the officer pauses. Which route deserves tomorrow's attention? No map offers certainty, only judgment. Nearby, an elderly guide quietly recommends following the northern trail because recent wagon traffic has increased there. The captain listens carefully. Experience earned over decades often outweighs formal rank when discussing unfamiliar country. Wisdom appears in many forms. The best leaders recognize it. The patrol establishes camp before darkness settles across the plain. Horses graze within a loose circle while coffee once again simmers above glowing embers. Someone quietly mends a torn saddlebag with thick thread. Another writes several brief notes describing the day's observations for tomorrow's report. No battle occurred. No shots were fired. Yet the patrol accomplished something important. Presence itself sends a message. So does restraint. Above the camp, countless stars gradually fill the clear desert sky. The same heavens stretch over wagon trains, frontier settlements, Apache camps, and distant mountain ridges where silent observers continue watching the changing world below. Everyone seeks tomorrow with cautious hope. No one fully controls what tomorrow may bring. The frontier grows busier, the misunderstandings grow deeper, and every careful patrol adds another small thread to the larger story that is slowly unfolding across the southwest. Your thoughts drift toward the rugged mountains where the first rays of sunlight creep slowly across dark stone cliffs. Cool air still lingers in the narrow canyons, carrying the clean scent of pine needles mixed with damp earth. Somewhere above, an eagle circles without hurry, gliding on rising currents that seem almost invisible. The mountains awaken quietly, so do the people who know them best, far from the growing network of military roads and frontier forts. Apache communities continue living among landscapes shaped by generations of careful observation. Every ridge has meaning. Every hidden spring carries a memory. Every canyon offers both shelter and responsibility. You begin climbing a rocky path beside several experienced Apache scouts. They move without wasted effort. Loose stones rarely shift beneath their feet. Branches bend gently before returning to place, leaving little sign that anyone has recently passed. The difference between experience and unfamiliarity becomes immediately obvious. A newcomer watches the mountains. The mountains watch everyone else. Research supported by Stanford University has emphasized that Apache mobility depended not only upon physical endurance, but also upon extraordinary environmental knowledge. Local geography, seasonal weather, reliable water, and hidden travel routes combined to create an intricate understanding of the Southwest that few outsiders could easily match. You notice one scout kneeling beside a patch of sandy ground. He studies faint tracks for only a few moments before quietly pointing toward a distant saddle between two hills. Several riders passed here yesterday. Their horses carried heavy loads. One animal favored its left front leg. Nothing about the trail surprises him. To you, the ground appears almost untouched. The scout smiles gently before continuing. Knowledge grows through years, never overnight. The mountains themselves shape every decision. Steep cliffs provide natural observation points stretching for miles across surrounding valleys. Narrow canyons conceal movement from distant eyes. Hidden springs support travelers even during the hottest weeks of summer. The landscape offers advantages, only to those who understand it. Elsewhere across the Southwest, American officers continue attempting to learn these same mountains. Maps improve slowly. Patrols record additional trails. Civilian guides contribute valuable information whenever available. Progress comes, but gradually. Every expedition teaches something new while revealing how much remains unknown. You pause beside a shaded spring tucked beneath overhanging rock. Ferns grow unexpectedly along the water's edge despite the dry country surrounding them. The gentle sound of flowing water fills the quiet canyon, while dragonflies hover above smooth pools reflecting patches of blue sky. This place feels hidden, because it is, for generations. Reliable springs like this have determined travel patterns across the Southwest. A person who knows where water waits can cross country that appears impossible to outsiders. Water becomes freedom. Ignorance becomes danger nearby. Several young Apache riders practice moving swiftly across uneven slopes. Older relatives quietly observe rather than constantly instruct. Small corrections are offered only when necessary. Confidence develops naturally, not through constant criticism. The riders learn to communicate with subtle gestures rather than loud voices. A raised hand, a slight nod, a brief whistle carried by the wind. Silence often proves more useful than conversation, especially in unfamiliar country. Historians continue debating exactly how American military leaders eventually adapted to Apache methods of movement across difficult terrain. Some scholars argue that years of experience gradually improved frontier operations through better scouting and local partnerships. Others believe the environmental advantage remained firmly with Apache communities throughout much of the conflict. Contemporary military correspondence frequently acknowledges the remarkable difficulty of pursuing highly mobile groups across such demanding landscapes. The afternoon sun slowly reaches deeper into the mountains. Warmth replaces the morning chill. The scent of sun-heated pine bark drifts through the air while small lizards dart across smooth rocks before disappearing into narrow cracks. Nature continues without concern. Human history remains only one small part of it. Far below, a tiny military patrol appears on the valley floor. From this high vantage point, the soldiers resemble moving dots crossing an immense canvas of green and brown. Their pace seems steady but predictable. The scouts watch quietly, not with excitement, with careful attention. Observation requires discipline. One older scout quietly explains to younger companions that understanding another group's routine often proves more valuable than the unnecessary confrontation. Knowing where patrols travel allows families to avoid unwanted encounters whenever possible. Avoidance can be wisdom, not weakness. At the same time, American officers view regular patrols as essential demonstrations of federal presence. They hope that consistent movement along major trails will reassure settlers, discourage theft, and improve communication between isolated forts. Each side believes its actions are reasonable. Each interprets the other's movements differently. As afternoon fades, you descend toward a broad meadow where several families have gathered for a temporary camp. Horses graze peacefully while children chase one another through patches of tall grass. Elderly relatives prepare their evening meals over carefully tended fires. The smell of roasting meat mixes with wood smoke. Laughter returns. For a little while, the growing tensions beyond the mountains feel very far away. One elderly man begins sharing memories of earlier decades before American control reached these lands. His listeners remain silent, allowing every detail to settle naturally. The stories are not only about conflict. They speak of changing seasons, successful hunts, long journeys, unexpected friendships, trade across distant valleys. Life contains far more than war. History sometimes forgets this simple truth. As darkness approaches, scouts quietly return with reports gathered throughout the day. More wagon traffic. Another military patrol. No immediate danger. The information is received calmly. No dramatic speeches follow. Only thoughtful discussion. Decisions affecting families rarely emerge from haste. Across the same evening sky, smoke rises from distant frontier forts where soldiers also prepare supper and exchange reports before nightfall. Their conversations sound different, yet many concerns remain surprisingly familiar. Safe travel, reliable water, healthy horses, tomorrow's weather. The frontier quietly reminds everyone that daily survival often matters more than political ambition. The stars begin appearing above the mountains one after another. Their pale light touches the ridges, the valleys, the camps, and the lonely trails connecting them all. Two worlds continue moving through the same landscape, sometimes close together, sometimes far apart. Neither has fully chosen the road ahead. Yet with every passing season, opportunities for simple understanding become a little more difficult to preserve. The mountains remain patient. History keeps moving, one careful step at a time. For a moment, it feels as though the desert itself is holding its breath. The morning arrives without wind, leaving the tall grasses almost perfectly still beneath a pale blue sky. The silence is so complete that you can hear tiny insects moving among dry leaves and the soft splash of a bird landing beside a narrow stream. Nothing appears unusual, Yet beneath this calm surface, important decisions are quietly taking shape. You find yourself beside a gathering of respected Apache leaders seated beneath a broad cottonwood whose branches cast welcome shade across the warm ground. No grand throne stands here. No elaborate ceremony announces the meeting. Men and women arrive calmly, greeting one another with quiet familiarity before settling into thoughtful conversation. Leadership here is earned, not inherited through titles alone. The people assembled have gained respect through years of sound judgment, courage, generosity, and experience. Some are skilled hunters, others are gifted negotiators. A few have spent years traveling among neighboring communities, learning how to settle disagreements before they become dangerous. Every voice matters. Some simply carry greater weight. Research from Harvard University emphasizes that Apache political organization was largely decentralized. Authority rested with respected local leaders whose influence depended upon personal reputation, practical wisdom, and the willingness of families to follow their guidance rather than unquestioned command. That reality often puzzled American officials. Many military officers expected to negotiate with a single chief who could speak for every Apache community across the Southwest. Such a person did not exist, not in the way outsiders imagined. You quietly take a place near the edge of the gathering. No one rushes the discussion. Long pauses become part of the conversation. Several scouts report increasing wagon traffic through nearby valleys. Another traveler describes the construction of yet another military post farther east. A respected elder quietly mentions that familiar grazing lands now receive far more visitors than only a few seasons earlier. No single report seems overwhelming. Together they suggest steady change. The mood remains thoughtful rather than fearful. Experienced leaders understand that reacting too quickly often creates unnecessary problems. They prefer listening carefully before deciding how families should respond. Patience protects communities. Impatience often serves uncertainty. One younger warrior speaks passionately about defending traditional travel routes more aggressively. An older leader listens without interruption before gently asking several practical questions. How many travelers? Which valleys? How often? Have peaceful meetings still occurred? The questions slow the conversation, not to dismiss concern, to understand it. Historians continue debating how different Apache leaders balanced diplomacy and resistance during these early frontier years. Some scholars argue that many communities initially preferred avoiding unnecessary confrontation whenever possible. Others point to growing pressure upon resources that steadily reduced opportunities for peaceful coexistence. Surviving accounts suggest that responses varied considerably between local bands and changing circumstances. The discussion gradually turns toward trade. Several families continue exchanging goods with nearby settlements. Metal tools remain useful, cloth, livestock, and practical supplies improve daily life. Few people wish to abandon relationships that still provide mutual benefit. Trade encourages stability. When trust survives, yet everyone recognizes that trust has become more fragile. Rumors spread quickly across the frontier. One frightening story carried by a traveler may reach distant valleys long before anyone confirms whether it actually happened. Fear often arrives faster than truth. You notice a young mother quietly rocking her sleeping child beneath the shade while the meeting continues. She listens carefully without speaking. Her concerns are simple. Will the family remain safe? Will reliable water still be available? Will tomorrow resemble yesterday? Large political questions eventually return to ordinary homes. They always do. The afternoon sun climbs steadily higher. Heat settles across the valley until even the birds grow quieter. A faint smell of warm sage drifts through the air while distant cicadas begin their steady chorus from scattered trees. Several horses graze peacefully near the edge of camp. Children gather wild berries beneath careful supervision. Life continues, even while important choices are being considered. Far away, inside a frontier fort, American officers hold their own meeting. They examine patrol reports, review supply inventories, discuss immigrant concerns, plan the next week's movements. The similarities are striking. Both gatherings seek security. Both rely upon incomplete information. Both hope to avoid greater trouble. Yet neither fully understands the conversations taking place in the other camp. That unseen distance grows increasingly important. Research from the University of California has highlighted that misunderstandings on the 19th century frontier frequently resulted from limited communication rather than immediate hostility. Decisions made by one community often appeared mysterious or threatening to another simply because intentions remained unknown. As evening approaches, the meeting beneath the cottonwood begins reaching quiet conclusions. Families should remain watchful. Scouts should continue observing major travel routes. Trade should continue where trust remains possible. Avoid unnecessary confrontation. Protect familiar resources. The guidance feels measured, not dramatic. Leadership sometimes appears ordinary. Its greatest strength often lies in preventing crises rather than creating memorable speeches. One elderly leader remains seated after many others begin leaving. He watches the fading sunlight reflecting upon distant mountains for several peaceful minutes before speaking softly to a nearby grandson. He reminds the boy that anger moves quickly. Wisdom walks more slowly. The child nods without fully understanding. Perhaps one day he will. As darkness gradually settles across the valley, cooking fires brighten one by one. The smell of roasted corn and fresh meat fills the cool evening air. Families gather close together while storytellers begin sharing memories from earlier generations. Laughter quietly returns. Children grow sleepy. The worries of the day do not disappear. They simply rest until morning. Across the same horizon, lanterns glow inside military barracks where officers complete written reports before extinguishing their lights. Settlers finish repairing wagons. Traders count remaining supplies beneath canvas shelters. Everyone prepares for another day. The frontier never truly sleeps. Above them all, countless stars appear across the immense desert sky, unchanged by maps, borders, or human disagreements. The heavens remain silent. The earth remains patient. Below, careful leaders on every side continue searching for paths that might preserve peace while protecting those who depend upon them. For now, those paths still exist, though they are becoming narrower with every passing season. Your mind drifts toward the rough wooden walls of a lonely frontier fort, where another quiet morning begins with the familiar sound of a bugle echoing across the open plain. The clear notes fade into the cool desert air, while sleepy soldiers slowly emerge from their barracks. Some stretch aching shoulders before reaching for boots that never seem completely free of dust. Others quietly gather their blankets, already preparing for another ordinary day. Life inside a frontier fort is far less dramatic than many people imagine. Most days begin the same way, and many end the same way. You step through the fort gate as the first sunlight touches the parade ground. The smell of wood smoke hangs gently over the buildings where breakfast is already being prepared. Coffee bubbles inside blackened kettles. Salted pork sizzles over open fires. Fresh bread is uncommon, making hard biscuits the dependable companion of nearly every meal. No one complains very loudly. There is little point. Research from the University of Chicago has shown that soldiers stationed across the early southwestern frontier spent far more time maintaining posts, escorting travelers, repairing equipment, and struggling with logistics than participating in combat. Daily routine, rather than constant danger, shaped most of their military experience. You join several enlisted men carrying buckets from the fort well. The work is repetitive, yet completely necessary. Water is needed for cooking, cleaning, horses, blacksmith work, laundry, and medical care. Every bucket carried before breakfast saves another trip beneath the afternoon heat. The fort survives through countless small tasks, not heroic moments. Nearby, the blacksmith has already begun his day. The rhythmic ring of hammer-striking iron fills the morning while bright sparks briefly leap into the air. Horseshoes must be repaired. Wagon fittings require attention. Broken tools rarely repair themselves. Metal wears out. The frontier never stops using it. Inside another building, a quartermaster carefully counts sacks of flour, barrels of beans, crates of ammunition, candles, blankets, and medical supplies. Every shipment arriving from the east is recorded with remarkable care, because replacing missing supplies may require weeks or even months. Distance governs everything. Even simple shortages become serious. A young clerk quietly sharpens his pencil before copying inventory numbers into a large ledger. His handwriting remains steady despite the growing warmth inside the office. History often remembers generals. It rarely remembers clerks, yet armies cannot function without either. Outside the fort walls, several teamsters prepare wagons carrying supplies toward another isolated post. The oxen stand patiently while leather harnesses are checked for weak straps. Drivers examine every wheel before departure because mechanical failure far from help could delay an entire convoy. Preparation becomes habit. Habit becomes survival. You notice one elderly civilian mechanic quietly tightening loose bolts on every wagon without waiting to be asked. Years upon the frontier have taught him that unnoticed problems rarely remain small. His experience speaks through action, not speeches. As the morning progresses, the parade ground fills with soldiers practicing simple drills. Commands are given calmly, boots strike the ground together, rifles are inspected rather than fired. Discipline grows through repetition, even when no battle waits ahead. Many younger recruits initially find frontier service disappointing. They imagine glorious campaigns and dramatic victories. Instead, they discover endless maintenance, long patrols, paperwork, construction projects, and equipment inspections. Reality feels quieter. It also feels more demanding. Historians continue debating whether the isolation of frontier forts strengthened military professionalism or weakened morale during the early 1850s. Some scholars point to detailed correspondence describing boredom, homesickness, and frustration. Others emphasize that these same conditions encouraged adaptability, self-reliance, and close cooperation among small garrisons. The surviving letters reveal convincing evidence for both experiences. Near the infirmary, an army physician examines several patients. None have battle wounds. One suffers dehydration. Another has an infected blister caused by weeks of marching. A third struggles with persistent stomach illness after drinking unsafe water. Disease remains an uninvited companion, often more dangerous than violence. The physician works patiently despite limited medicines. Clean bandages, fresh water, rest whenever possible. Sometimes these simple treatments matter most. The afternoon sun settles heavily over the fort. Heat radiates from wooden walls until the air itself seems to shimmer. The smell of hot pine mixes with warm leather and horse sweat drifting from nearby corrals. Even conversation slows. Energy must be conserved. Several soldiers sit beneath the shade of a wagon, repairing torn uniforms with thick thread. One carefully patches worn knees, while another replaces missing buttons scavenged from an old coat. Nothing useful is discarded. Everything may prove valuable later. Beyond the fort gate, a small group of emigrants arrive seeking temporary shelter before continuing west. Their wagon axle cracked 2 days earlier while crossing rocky ground. The garrison carpenter examines the damage without hesitation. Helping travelers has become another ordinary duty. Not every service involves weapons. Children from the wagon train stare curiously at the soldiers while waiting beside their tired horses. One private smiles before carving a tiny wooden whistle from leftover pine. The little gift quickly earns delighted laughter. For a brief moment, the fort feels less like a military post, more like a small frontier village. Across the parade ground, an officer quietly reviews patrol schedules for the coming week. Every route must balance limited manpower against expanding responsibilities. Escort this wagon train, check that mountain pass, deliver reports to another fort, inspect road conditions. There are never enough men, never enough time. As evening approaches, the temperature finally begins to fall. A welcome breeze carries the smell of dry grass across the parade ground, while horses settle calmly inside their corrals. Supper is served beneath an orange sky, slowly fading toward deep blue. Coffee again. Beans again. Hard bread again. Someone jokes that the menu changes only when the cook accidentally burns it. Gentle laughter spreads around the table. Small humour eases long days. After supper, several soldiers gather outside the barracks sharing stories from home. One misses the forests of Pennsylvania. Another remembers fishing beside rivers in Kentucky. A third quietly wonders whether his youngest daughter will recognize him when his enlistment finally ends. Distance weighs heavily, even under beautiful skies. As darkness settles across the frontier, Sentries quietly take their places along the wooden walls. Lanterns glow softly inside officers' quarters, while the blacksmith finally allows his forge to cool. The fort grows quiet, but never completely silent. Somewhere beyond the reach of the lantern light, Apache families prepare for sleep beneath the same stars. Traders continue traveling dusty roads. Wagon trains rest beside streams. Scouts move quietly through mountain shadows. Everyone follows different paths, yet all remain connected by the same changing frontier. Inside these lonely forts, ordinary routines continue day after day. Unremarkable on their own, together, they slowly shape the larger history that is still unfolding across the Southwest. Your thoughts wander beyond the wooden walls of the frontier forts and away from the long columns of emigrant wagons. You follow a quieter path that winds toward the scattered homes, trading camps, and small settlements standing between two changing worlds. The people living here rarely appear in grand paintings of the American frontier, yet their lives quietly connect nearly everyone else. The morning begins with the soft sound of a hand mill grinding corn. Smoke curls gently from low chimneys. A rooster calls across the valley. Life feels ordinary. It is also remarkably uncertain. Not everyone living along the frontier is a soldier or a settler arriving from the eastern states. Many families have lived in the Southwest for generations under Spanish rule, later under Mexican authority, and now within territory controlled by the United States. Others come from mixed cultural backgrounds, speaking more than one language and moving comfortably between different communities. Some become traders, others become guides. Many simply hope to continue living peaceful lives. Research from the University of New Mexico has emphasized that the 19th century Southwest was culturally diverse long before large-scale American settlement accelerated. Native communities, Hispanic families, traders, ranchers, merchants, interpreters, and military personnel all contributed to a complex frontier society that cannot be understood through only two opposing groups. You arrive at a small settlement beside a slow-moving river. The houses are simple but carefully maintained. Fruit trees grow beside several homes. A few chickens wander freely through dusty yards, while goats graze along the edge of nearby fields. Children laugh as they chase one another beneath broad cottonwood branches. It feels almost timeless. Yet change quietly surrounds it. A local merchant unlocks the heavy wooden door of his modest trading store shortly after sunrise. Shelves hold flour, salt, candles, blankets, cooking pots, cloth, nails, and precious coffee carefully measured to avoid waste. Every item has travelled a long distance. Nothing here arrives easily. Soon customers begin appearing. A soldier purchases fresh leather straps to replace worn equipment. A rancher searches for spare horseshoes. An emigrant family hopes to buy additional flour before continuing west. An Apache trader quietly examines metal tools whose durability makes them valuable for everyday work. The merchant greets each visitor with the same calm respect. His livelihood depends upon maintaining trust, not choosing sides. You notice that conversations often begin with practical questions rather than politics. How much rain has fallen? Has anyone seen good grazing farther south? Which trail remains safest after last week's storm? Information circulates naturally. Every traveller contributes another small piece. Many settlements survive because people willingly share useful knowledge. A blacksmith working beneath a shaded shelter pauses between customers to wipe sweat from his forehead. The steady rhythm of hammer against iron fills the warm morning air. Sparks rise briefly before disappearing into bright sunlight. His forge repairs wagon wheels, horseshoes, farm tools, cooking pots. Everyone eventually needs his skills. Nearby, a young interpreter quietly helps two strangers understand one another during a trading discussion. His work requires far more than translating words. He must recognize gestures, customs, expectations, and subtle differences in meaning that outsiders might completely overlook. One poorly chosen phrase can create confusion. One carefully explained sentence can prevent it. Historians continue debating the long-term influence of frontier interpreters and cultural intermediaries during the early Apache conflicts. Some scholars argue that skilled interpreters prevented numerous local disputes through patient communication. Others point out that even the most talented mediators struggled when larger political pressures steadily intensified. Contemporary accounts praise individual successes while acknowledging broader difficulties. You continue walking through the settlement. A ranching family prepares livestock for market. Several women spread freshly washed clothing across ropes stretched between trees. Children gather eggs before the afternoon heat becomes too intense. Life continues through familiar routines. Despite growing uncertainty beyond the valley, a respected local guide joins you for part of the journey. His weathered face reflects decades spent crossing deserts, mountains, and river valleys. He knows where hidden springs remain reliable after dry winters. He remembers trails abandoned years earlier. He has escorted merchants, soldiers, scientists, missionaries, and emigrant families across country that newcomers often consider impossible. He trusts observation, more than rumour, as you walk together. He quietly explains that the frontier is becoming busier every season. More wagons, more livestock, more survey parties, more military patrols. The landscape itself has not changed. The number of people depending upon it certainly has. The guide does not speak with bitterness, only quiet realism. By midday, the heat settles heavily across the valley. The scent of warm sage drifts through open fields while cicadas begin their steady song from nearby trees. Even the animals seek shade wherever they can find it. The settlement grows quieter. Work continues more slowly, inside a small home. An elderly woman carefully mends worn clothing beside an open window. She has watched governments change more than once during her lifetime. Flags have risen and fallen above the same countryside, while daily responsibilities have remained remarkably familiar. Meals still require cooking. Children still require care. Fields still require tending. History often changes gradually for ordinary families, even when maps change suddenly. Research from Columbia University has noted that many civilian communities experience the transition from Mexican to American administration as an uneven process shaped by local conditions rather than immediate transformation. Everyday life frequently continued through existing relationships, while new political systems slowly developed around them. Late in the afternoon, several travellers arrive unexpectedly seeking water and a safe place to rest before continuing tomorrow. No one asks many questions at first. Hospitality comes before curiosity. Fresh water is offered. Animals are watered. Simple food is shared. Kindness survives, even during uncertain times. As evening approaches, the entire settlement seems to breathe more slowly. Cooking fires brighten. The rich smell of beans, roasted meat, and fresh tortillas fills the cooling air. Families gather outdoors while older relatives tell familiar stories beneath skies slowly filling with stars. Laughter returns. Children become sleepy. The worries of tomorrow wait until morning. Beyond the settlement, however, larger forces continue moving. More emigrants cross distant trails. Additional military reports travel between isolated forts. Apache scouts quietly observe changing patterns across familiar valleys. No single community controls these events. Everyone must adapt to them. The stars shine equally above every camp, every cabin, every trading post, and every lonely trail disappearing into the mountains. You realize that history is rarely shaped only by famous leaders or celebrated battles. It is also shaped by merchants who keep honest scales, guides who share trusted paths, interpreters who patiently bridge misunderstanding, families who continue planting fields despite uncertainty. Their quiet lives become part of the frontier's foundation, even when history books mention them only briefly. Your thoughts slowly rise toward the high country where the mountains seem to touch the morning sky. The air is noticeably cooler here. A gentle wind carries the fresh scent of pine, damp stone, and wild grass growing between weathered rocks below you. Broad valleys stretch toward distant deserts, while narrow canyons disappear into shadows that seem almost endless. The land itself feels alive, not through movement, through memory. You begin climbing a winding trail known well by generations of Apache families. Every bend reveals another hidden corner of the Southwest. Massive boulders stand like quiet guardians above the path. Tall pines sway softly against a cloudless sky. Small streams emerge unexpectedly from rocky slopes before vanishing once more beneath thick brush. Nothing here is accidental. Every feature serves a purpose. Research from the University of Arizona has emphasized that the rugged geography of the Southwest played a central role in shaping Apache life for centuries. Mountain ranges provided shelter, reliable water, hunting opportunities, observation points, and secure travel routes that outsiders often struggle to understand. You quickly realize why. The trail appears simple at first. Then it disappears. Only someone familiar with the country notices faint signs showing where to continue. A slightly worn stone, a broken branch, a narrow gap between shrubs. Knowledge opens invisible doors. Without it, the mountains remain a maze. You pause beside a cool spring sheltered beneath towering cliffs. Clear water flows steadily into a shallow pool surrounded by moss and ferns, creating a small world entirely different from the dry valleys below. The sound of moving water fills the canyon, soft, steady, comforting. Several Apache travelers refill leather water bags while quietly discussing the safest route toward another valley. They speak with confidence born from countless journeys through these same mountains. Every spring has a history. Every trail has a story. Nearby, young children carefully gather pine cones for the evening fire. An older woman smiles gently as she watches them work, occasionally pointing towards safer footing on the rocky ground. Learning happens constantly, not only during formal lessons. One young boy pauses to examine the tracks of a mule deer crossing damp soil beside the stream. His grandfather kneels beside him. Instead of simply naming the animal, he asks the child what he notices first. The direction, the depth, the freshness. The lesson encourages observation, not memorization. The mountains reward careful thinking. Far below, a small military patrol moves slowly across an open meadow. From this height, their progress appears almost effortless. You know better. The journey below is difficult. The climb above is equally demanding. Perspective changes everything. Historians continue debating how completely American military officers eventually learned to navigate the complex terrain of the Southwest during these early years. Some researchers believe experienced frontier guides dramatically improved military understanding over time. Others argue that Apache familiarity with the landscape remained a decisive advantage well beyond the period covered by this story. Military correspondence frequently acknowledges how challenging mountain operations could become. As the morning continues, you follow a narrow ridge overlooking several distant valleys. From here, nearly every movement below becomes visible. Smoke rising from a campfire, a wagon train following a dusty trail, horses grazing beside a creek, clouds gathering over distant peaks. The mountains quietly reveal information. To those patient enough to watch, experienced Apache scouts understand that seeing danger early often prevents conflict entirely. Avoiding unnecessary encounters protects families, conserves energy, and preserves valuable resources. Not every challenge requires confrontation. Sometimes distance becomes the wisest choice. You continue climbing until the trail reaches a broad meadow surrounded by towering forests. Wildflowers cover the open ground. Butterflies drift lazily between bright blossoms. The peaceful setting almost invites you to forget the growing tension elsewhere across the frontier. Nature continues its rhythm. Regardless of politics, several hunters quietly prepare to leave camp. They inspect bows, arrows, horses, and simple supplies before disappearing among the trees. No dramatic speeches accompany their departure, only practical preparation. Food must still be gathered. Families must still eat. The afternoon sun gradually warms the high country, filling the air with the rich fragrance of sun-heated pine needles. Squirrels dart across fallen logs while hawks circle high above the cliffs, searching patiently for movement below. Every creature follows familiar patterns. Humans do the same. Yet those familiar patterns are beginning to change. Increasing wagon traffic appears in valleys once visited only occasionally by outsiders. New military roads slowly connect distant forts. Survey markers quietly appear beside old travel routes. The mountains notice everything, even if they never speak. Research supported by the University of California has highlighted that environmental knowledge represented one of the greatest strategic resources available to native communities across the Southwest. Knowing seasonal water sources, weather changes, and hidden travel corridors often proved more valuable than larger numbers or superior equipment. Late in the afternoon, dark clouds begin gathering beyond the western ridges. Thunder rolls softly through the mountains. A brief summer storm arrives. Rain falls heavily for only a few minutes before sunlight returns almost as quickly. The forest smells wonderfully fresh. Drops of water cling to pine branches like tiny crystals. Children laugh while shaking rain from low-hanging limbs. The moment feels joyful. Simple pleasures remain abundant. As evening approaches, families gather beside carefully tended fires protected from the cooling mountain breeze. Supper is modest but satisfying. Roasted meat, wild plants gathered earlier, fresh spring water, shared conversation. One elder quietly points toward the mountains now glowing deep orange beneath the setting sun. He reminds younger listeners that the land remembers those who respect it. The mountains never hurry. Neither should wisdom. Across the distant valleys, small columns of smoke rise from military camps and scattered frontier settlements. Their fires appear tiny against the immense landscape. The same evening settles over everyone. Soldiers, settlers, traders, Apache families. All pause beneath identical stars. The mountains remain unchanged. People continue changing around them. You sit quietly beside the fading fire while cool night air flows gently through the tall pines. Somewhere far below, another wagon train prepares for tomorrow's journey. Another patrol studies tomorrow's route. Another family wonders what the next season will bring. The land still offers protection. It still offers hope. Yet every passing month draws more lives into its embrace, making every hidden valley, every quiet spring, and every mountain trail increasingly important to the future that is slowly unfolding across the southwest. Your attention settles upon a broad valley where the evening breeze carries the pleasant scent of wood smoke through scattered cottonwood trees. The light has become soft and golden, smoothing the rough edges of rocks and hills that only hours earlier shimmered beneath the fierce desert sun. Horses graze quietly beside a narrow stream. Somewhere nearby, a child laughs before being gently reminded that supper is almost ready. The frontier feels peaceful again, at least for this evening. You slowly approach a temporary gathering where several respected Apache leaders have agreed to meet with traders, local officials, and representatives connected to nearby military posts. No elaborate hall has been built for such conversations. Instead, everyone gathers beneath the open sky where shade and water make discussion possible. The setting is modest. The questions are not. Many people still believe that practical agreements can preserve stability. Travelers require safe roads. Apache families require reliable access to familiar hunting grounds and water. Traders depend upon trust. Military officers hope to prevent incidents before they demand larger responses. Each goal appears reasonable. Together they prove difficult. Research from Harvard University has shown that the early frontier contained numerous local attempts at negotiation before wider warfare became established. Success often depended upon personal relationships, experienced intermediaries, and conditions unique to each community rather than broad national policy. You notice that nobody begins speaking immediately. Water is shared first. People settle comfortably. The silence itself communicates respect. An experienced trader quietly opens the discussion by describing increasing wagon traffic through several nearby valleys. He does not exaggerate the situation. He simply explains what he has observed over recent months. More immigrants, more livestock, more pressure upon the land. A respected Apache leader listens without interruption. When his turn comes, he speaks calmly about familiar springs becoming crowded during dry seasons, and traditional travel routes becoming increasingly difficult to use. His concerns sound practical, not hostile, across the gathering. A young military officer explains that additional patrols have been ordered mainly to reassure travelers after recent reports of stolen livestock. He carefully avoids accusing anyone directly because no clear evidence exists. His caution is appreciated. Words matter here. You begin noticing how much of successful negotiation depends upon patience rather than persuasion. Each speaker waits for the previous one to finish completely. Interruptions remain rare. Even disagreement is expressed with measured voices rather than anger. The atmosphere feels hopeful, fragile, but hopeful. One elderly interpreter becomes the quiet center of the meeting. He translates carefully, pausing often to ensure that ideas, rather than merely individual words, cross from one language to another. He understands something important. Literal translation is rarely enough. Meaning must travel as well. A slight misunderstanding can easily grow into unnecessary suspicion. A respectful explanation can prevent confusion before it begins. The interpreter carries that responsibility with remarkable calm. Historians continue debating why so many early negotiations produced only temporary success, despite sincere effort from participants. Some scholars believe local agreements often worked until outside events disrupted them. Others argue that rapid migration and expanding settlement created pressures that exceeded what isolated meetings could resolve. Surviving correspondence suggests both explanations contain considerable truth. The afternoon breeze strengthens. Leaves rustle softly overhead. The smell of fresh coffee drifts from a nearby cooking fire where simple refreshments are being prepared for everyone present. For a little while, ordinary hospitality softens political tension. One trader quietly offers bread to a visiting family. A soldier helps refill water containers without being asked. Children watch one another from a respectful distance before curiosity slowly overcomes hesitation. Small gestures matter, sometimes more than formal speeches. The conversation gradually turns toward practical solutions. Could wagon trains avoid certain valleys during the driest weeks? Could patrols notify nearby communities before moving through familiar hunting areas? Could trusted traders continue carrying messages between settlements? Every proposal reflects genuine effort. None guarantees lasting success. The difficulty lies beyond the meeting itself. No single gathering represents every traveller crossing the southwest. No individual leader speaks for every scattered community. Even sincere promises become difficult to maintain across enormous distances. The frontier remains vast. Communication remains slow. A respected elder quietly reminds everyone that trust grows much more slowly than fear. Several people nod in thoughtful agreement. His observation requires no translation. Everyone understands. Research supported by Yale University has emphasized that successful frontier diplomacy frequently depended upon repeated personal contact rather than isolated negotiations. Relationships strengthened through consistency. While long interruptions often allowed suspicion to return, as the sun lowers toward the western horizon, golden light fills the valley with remarkable warmth. Shadows lengthen across the grass where horses continue grazing peacefully. The entire landscape seems determined to encourage calm. Nature offers the setting. People must choose the outcome. The meeting slowly concludes. Hands are raised in respectful farewell. Travel routes are discussed one final time. Several participants promise to meet again when circumstances allow. No grand treaty is signed. No dramatic declaration echoes across the valley. Instead, everyone departs carrying cautious optimism mixed with quiet uncertainty. Sometimes history advances through small conversations. Sometimes it quietly retreats from them. You remain beside the fading campfire after most travelers have disappeared into the evening. The interpreter carefully folds his worn notebook before placing it inside a leather satchel. The trader secures his remaining supplies. The officer studies tomorrow's route. The Apache families prepare for the journey home beneath the first emerging stars. Each believes today's discussion has value. Each also understands that tomorrow will present fresh challenges. Across the southwest, other meetings unfold differently. Some succeed, some fail, some never happen at all. The frontier grows busier with every passing season. New wagon trains continue arriving. Additional military patrols continue riding. More settlers establish permanent homes. More familiar valleys become shared spaces. The opportunities for peaceful understanding still exist, yet they require increasing patience from everyone involved. Above the quiet valley, the stars gradually brighten until the sky seems endless once more. The mountains remain silent witnesses. The streams continue flowing toward distant rivers. The wind carries away the last traces of smoke from the evening fires. You take one final look across the peaceful gathering place before continuing your journey. The hope for lasting peace has not disappeared, but it now walks beside growing uncertainty, and both will accompany the frontier into the difficult years waiting just ahead. Your mind drifts into the cool stillness before dawn, when the desert has not yet surrendered to the heat of another day. A faint breeze brushes across low grasses, carrying the earthy scent of damp sand left behind by a brief shower during the night. Above you, the final stars slowly fade as a pale band of light appears along the eastern horizon. Another morning begins. It feels much like yesterday, yet the frontier is no longer quite the same. The changes have arrived gradually. Almost quietly, a wagon crosses a familiar ford where only a handful of travellers once passed each month. Another military courier follows a route that did not exist a few years earlier. A small ranch expands its grazing land beyond the stream. None of these actions seem extraordinary by themselves. Together, however, they begin forming something larger. You continue walking through the broad valleys of the southwest, noticing how the landscape now carries more signs of human activity than before. Wagon tracks overlap older footpaths. Freshly cut timber appears where new cabins are under construction. Small fields of corn and beans occupy patches of ground that recently remained untouched. The land remembers every footprint, even when people do not. Research from Princeton University has noted that the years immediately following the acquisition of the Southwest marked a period of accelerating transformation rather than sudden revolution. Migration, military expansion, transportation, and settlement advanced unevenly. But together they reshape the region far more rapidly than many contemporary observers expected. You pause beside a shallow crossing where clear water flows gently over smooth stones. Several travellers stop to refill their canteens. An Apache family waits patiently until the wagons finish crossing. Neither group wishes for unnecessary conflict. Both simply need water. The quiet moment reveals something important. Shared resources increasingly require shared patience. That patience is becoming more difficult to maintain. Farther down the trail, a group of settlers discusses recent reports carried from another valley. Someone claims a livestock raid occurred several days earlier. Another insists the story has already changed twice before reaching this camp. Nobody knows exactly what happened. Everyone has an opinion. Rumours travel remarkably well across the frontier. Facts struggle to keep pace. You have seen this pattern before. A small incident becomes a larger story. The larger story becomes accepted truth. Soon, people begin making decisions based upon events they never personally witnessed. Fear slowly gains momentum. Historical records reveal that many local disturbances during these early years remained isolated events. Yet as reports spread between forts, settlements, trading posts, and wagon trains, separate incidents often blended together inside public memory until they appeared to represent one continuous conflict. Historians still debate precisely when scattered tensions became a broader frontier war. Some scholars emphasize gradual escalation driven by repeated local disputes. Others argue that the cumulative pressure of migration, military expansion, and competition for resources eventually created a situation where isolated peace could no longer outweigh regional instability. Both interpretations recognize one reality. The frontier was changing. You continue climbing toward a rocky overlook where the entire valley stretches beneath you like an enormous map. Smoke rises from several distant camps. One belongs to emigrants, another to soldiers, another to Apache families. The smoke rises in exactly the same way. The people beneath it live increasingly different realities. A military courier rides quickly along a dusty trail carrying reports toward the nearest fort. His horse breathes heavily after many miles beneath the rising sun. The leather saddle creaks softly with every stride. The message inside his satchel may influence future patrols, perhaps even future policy. He does not know. He simply rides. Nearby, an experienced Apache scout observes the same courier from high ground. He watches the direction of travel, estimates the horse's condition, and quietly notes the increasing frequency of such movements. Information matters. For everyone, neither man considers himself part of a great historical turning point. Each performs an ordinary responsibility. History quietly grows from ordinary responsibilities. The afternoon heat settles across the valley. Grasshoppers leap through dry brush. The smell of warm sage drifts across open ground. A lonely hawk circles high above the cliffs, while distant thunder rumbles beyond mountains too far away to receive rain. Nature continues without choosing sides. It simply continues. Research supported by Stanford University has highlighted that environmental pressures and expanding human activity often interacted in complex ways across the 19th century Southwest. Water availability, grazing conditions, seasonal weather, and increasing migration combined to influence local relationships as much as political decisions did. You arrive at a small crossroads where 4 different trails meet. Several travelers have stopped there to rest. A merchant shares coffee with a soldier. An emigrant repairs a broken wagon tongue. A local rancher discusses grazing conditions with another passing family. The conversations remain practical, yet beneath them lies growing uncertainty. Will these roads remain safe? Will more forts appear? Will familiar routes remain open? Nobody possesses reliable answers. As evening approaches, long shadows stretch across the desert floor. Children gather firewood. Horses drink quietly from a shallow creek. The comforting smell of stew rises from several cooking pots suspended above glowing coals. For a little while, ordinary life once again takes priority over distant concerns. Families eat together. Friends exchange stories. Laughter briefly returns. Then someone mentions another report arriving from the east. The conversation grows quieter. No dramatic announcement follows, only thoughtful silence. Everyone senses that the frontier has entered a new stage, not because of one decisive battle, not because of one famous speech, because hundreds of separate moments have slowly woven themselves together into something larger than any individual can easily control. The stars begin appearing above the darkening mountains. You watch them one by one while the fires below burn steadily through the cool desert night. The Southwest still holds remarkable beauty. It still offers opportunities for understanding. Yet the balance has become increasingly delicate. Each passing season adds another thread to the growing tension. Each new trail connects more distant communities. Each rumor travels farther. The frontier conflict has not fully revealed its future, but it now possesses its own quiet momentum. Like a river gathering strength from countless small streams. The scattered incidents of the past several years are beginning to merge into one larger current. Soon, almost everyone living in this vast country will feel its pull. Your attention settles upon a quiet homestead standing alone beneath an enormous western sky. The first light of morning touches the rough timber walls, turning them a warm shade of gold. Smoke rises gently from a stone chimney, while a weathered wooden gate creaks softly in the cool breeze. Chickens wander through the yard, completely unaware that history is slowly changing the world beyond the fence. You pause for a moment. Everything feels peaceful. Everything also feels fragile. The great events remembered in history books eventually reach places like this. Not all at once, not with dramatic announcements. Instead, they arrive quietly through uncertain news, unfamiliar travellers, delayed letters, and the steady realization that life is becoming less predictable. You step into the daily routine of an ordinary frontier family. The father begins repairing a broken fence damaged during the previous week's storm. His hands move confidently after years of similar work. Nearby, his wife carefully kneads bread while keeping one eye on a pot of beans simmering over the fire. 2 young children carry water from the nearby creek, laughing whenever one splashes the other by accident. The morning feels wonderfully ordinary. That ordinary rhythm matters deeply. Research from Yale University has emphasized that the majority of people living through frontier expansion spent far more time managing family responsibilities than participating directly in military conflict. Farming, ranching, trade, and household labor shaped daily experience more consistently than dramatic historical events. You notice how carefully every task is planned. Nothing is wasted. Food must last. Tools must be repaired. Animals require attention every single day. The frontier offers little forgiveness for neglect. A broken wagon wheel may delay travel for weeks. A sick horse may threaten an entire family's livelihood. Simple responsibilities carry enormous weight. Across the valley, another family lives a different life beneath remarkably similar concerns. Apache parents also begin their morning by preparing food, gathering water, caring for children, and planning the day's work. Young people help older relatives with practical tasks while experienced hunters quietly discuss changing weather conditions before leaving camp. In different cultures, familiar hopes, safety, health, a future for the next generation. The similarities become impossible to ignore. As the morning continues, a travelling merchant arrives at the homestead carrying supplies loaded onto 2 sturdy mules. His saddlebags contain coffee, needles, cloth, lamp oil, and several letters collected from settlements farther east. Letters always attract attention. They carry pieces of distant lives. The merchant quietly shares recent news gathered during weeks upon the trail. Another wagon train has crossed the southern pass. A new military patrol has reached the nearest fort. More families are expected before winter. No one interrupts him. Every detail feels important. The father listens thoughtfully before asking whether the roads remain safe. The merchant pauses before answering. Safe enough. For now. The uncertainty inside those 2 words lingers long after the conversation ends. Historians continue debating how rapidly fear spread through civilian communities during these early years of frontier tension. Some scholars argue that newspapers and personal correspondence often magnified isolated incidents beyond their immediate importance. Others believe frontier families had good reason to remain cautious because communication delays frequently left them uncertain about changing conditions nearby. The afternoon sun climbs steadily higher. The smell of fresh bread fills the small cabin. A dog sleeps peacefully beneath the porch. The youngest child carefully gathers eggs from the chicken coop with remarkable seriousness, proudly carrying each one as though it were made of glass. Small victories brighten ordinary days. They always have. Not far away, an Apache family celebrates a successful hunt. Fresh meat is carefully prepared. Children eagerly help carry supplies back toward camp. Older relatives quietly praise the hunters while reminding younger listeners that gratitude should always accompany abundance. Success belongs to everyone, not only the hunter. The emotional distance between these families is far smaller than the political distance slowly developing around them. You begin noticing how both communities measure wealth differently from distant cities. Reliable water, healthy animals, strong family relationships, useful tools, knowledge passed from one generation to another. These remain the true foundations of survival. Research supported by Harvard University has observed that household resilience across the 19th century frontier depended heavily upon cooperation within extended families and local communities. Isolation rarely encouraged success. Mutual assistance often determined whether difficult seasons could be endured. As afternoon slowly gives way to evening, the homestead receives another unexpected visitor. A tired soldier asks permission to refill his canteen before continuing toward the nearest fort. The request is simple. The answer comes immediately. Of course, water is offered without hesitation. The soldier thanks the family politely before mentioning that additional patrols have been ordered across nearby trails. He offers no dramatic explanation, only practical information. He understands that rumors spread quickly enough without unnecessary embellishment. The father quietly nods. He has already guessed that change is approaching. Across another valley, Apache scouts also return with new observations gathered throughout the day. More wagons, more livestock. Another survey party. No immediate danger. Yet the pattern continues. Both families, both communities, both futures are being shaped by events extending far beyond their immediate control. The evening meal brings everyone together. Warm bread, beans, roasted vegetables, fresh water drawn from the creek. Conversation remains gentle. Children tell simple stories about the day's adventures. Adults smile more than they speak. For a little while, tomorrow can wait. The sunset slowly fills the western sky with deep shades of orange and crimson before fading into soft purple. Crickets begin singing. The breeze cools. Lantern light glows warmly through the cabin window. Across the hills, Apache campfires shine with equal warmth beneath the same gathering darkness. Families everywhere settle into familiar routines. Parents quietly hope that the coming months will remain peaceful. Grandparents wonder how much the frontier will change before another year passes. Children simply look forward to tomorrow. The stars appear one after another until the sky becomes brilliantly clear. Looking upward, it's impossible to tell where one community ends and another begins. The heavens recognize no borders. Only people do. Yet down upon the earth, Those invisible boundaries continue becoming more important with every passing season. Ordinary families still dream of ordinary futures. History, however, is steadily carrying them toward extraordinary times. Your thoughts settle into the quiet hours before sunrise, when the desert lies beneath a blanket of cool blue light and the world seems suspended between yesterday and tomorrow. The breeze has almost disappeared. Only the faint rustle of dry grass and the slow breathing of resting horses disturb the silence. Above you, the last bright stars begin surrendering to the coming dawn. The frontier feels calm, yet beneath that calm, something has changed. Not suddenly, gradually. You have walked across these valleys and mountains for several years now. Watching trails become busier, forts become stronger, settlements become larger, and familiar landscapes become increasingly shared by people carrying very different expectations. Each change seemed manageable. Together they have transformed the Southwest. Research from Princeton University has emphasized that historians increasingly understand the early 1850s not as a series of isolated incidents, but as a period during which numerous local developments gradually combined into a much broader frontier conflict. Migration, military expansion, environmental pressures, and cultural misunderstanding rarely acted alone. Instead, they reinforced one another over time. You stand beside a weathered trail marker where several roads now meet. Only a few years earlier, this crossing remained quiet for weeks at a time. Now wagons pass almost daily. Military couriers ride through at steady intervals. Merchants guide pack animals toward distant settlements. Apache scouts continue observing familiar valleys while adjusting to changing patterns of movement. Everyone notices the difference. No one can reverse it. The growing network of roads resembles the branches of a living tree. Each new trail encourages another. Each settlement creates demand for more supplies. Each supply route attracts additional protection. Each military patrol generates new observations. The frontier becomes increasingly connected and increasingly complicated. You continue walking toward a recently expanded military post. The fort appears busier than when you first visited months earlier. Additional storage buildings stand inside the walls. More livestock graze nearby. Supply wagons arrive with greater frequency. A carpenter is already raising another structure before breakfast. Expansion rarely announces itself. It simply continues. The commanding officer studies fresh reports delivered overnight. Another wagon train has safely crossed the mountains. A survey expedition requests military escort. Several ranchers have reported missing cattle. None of these events alone demands extraordinary action. Together they suggest a changing frontier. Across the same morning, Apache families discuss remarkably similar observations. More travelers, more permanent settlements, more unfamiliar faces along established routes. Traditional patterns of movement now require greater caution than before. The country remains familiar. Its rhythm does not. Historians still debate whether the transition from scattered disputes to sustained frontier warfare could have been slowed through different government policies or stronger local diplomacy. Some scholars believe practical compromises remained possible during these formative years. Others conclude that expanding migration and competing expectations regarding land eventually overwhelmed local efforts at accommodation. The surviving historical record leaves room for thoughtful disagreement. You pause beside a shallow creek flowing quietly beneath broad cottonwood branches. The cool water reflects clouds drifting lazily across the morning sky. A family of ducks glides across the surface without concern. Nature continues offering moments of remarkable peace. Even while human uncertainty grows, nearby, an elderly trader waters his horses before beginning another long journey. His beard has turned almost completely grey. His saddle shows years of careful repair. He has crossed these trails more times than he can remember. You ask what has changed most. He smiles gently before answering. Not the mountains, not the rivers, the number of people. His simple observation captures years of quiet transformation more effectively than any lengthy speech. People change landscapes, sometimes without realizing it. The afternoon brings another wagon train heading west. Children wave cheerfully at passing soldiers. Teamsters exchange friendly greetings with local ranchers. An Apache rider appears briefly upon a distant ridge before disappearing behind weathered stone. The frontier still contains countless ordinary moments. They simply unfold beneath increasing tension. Research supported by Stanford University has highlighted that expanding transportation networks during the mid-19th century altered social relationships as profoundly as they changed economics. Roads carried supplies, information, government authority, migration, and rumour with equal efficiency. The sun climbs high overhead. Heat shimmers above dusty ground. The familiar smell of warm leather returns as horses patiently continue their long journey across the valley. Nothing dramatic interrupts the afternoon, yet history continues moving. One wagon, one patrol, one conversation, one misunderstanding, at a time. As evening approaches, families gather beside campfires scattered across the countryside. Soldiers prepare coffee, settlers repair broken harnesses, Apache elders quietly share stories beneath open skies. Merchants calculate tomorrow's travel distance. Everyone plans for another ordinary day. None fully understands how close the region now stands to a longer period of sustained conflict. The warning signs have accumulated gradually. More forts, more settlements, greater competition for water, increasing livestock losses, growing distrust fueled by incomplete information. Each element strengthens the next, like threads woven into a single rope. You sit quietly beside the evening fire while cool air slowly replaces the day's heat. The flames crackle softly. Wood smoke drifts upward toward countless stars appearing one by one above the mountains. You think back to the beginning of this journey. The quiet valleys, the familiar trails, the hope that practical understanding might preserve peace. Those hopes have not completely vanished. They have simply become more difficult to protect. Across the immense southwest, people still wake each morning hoping to provide food for their families, care for their animals, complete honest work, and return safely before nightfall. Those desires remain universal. History does not erase them. It only places them under increasing strain. The stars brighten until the desert seems wrapped beneath a silent sea of light. The mountains remain unchanged. The rivers continue flowing. The wind still carries the scent of sage across the open country. Only human relationships have shifted, and they have shifted enough that the years ahead will no longer resemble those you have just experienced. The beginning is ending. A different chapter waits beyond the horizon. The Apache Wars have not reached their full intensity, but the frontier that made them possible now stands firmly in place. The quiet years are drawing to a close. The longer struggle is almost ready to begin. Your mind settles into the deep quiet that arrives just before sunrise. When the desert seems to pause between one chapter and the next, the stars still shine above the mountains. Although the eastern horizon has begun to brighten with a thin ribbon of silver, cool air brushes gently across your face, carrying the familiar scent of sage, dry earth, and distant pine somewhere far away. A lone horse softly nickers before returning to its morning stillness. You stop walking, not because the journey's over, because it has reached an important turning point. Looking back across the years between 1849 and 1854, you begin to understand that history rarely announces its greatest transformations. It usually whispers first. A wagon track appears where none existed before. A lonely fort rises beside a river crossing. A trusted trail grows crowded. A conversation succeeds. Another fails. A rumor travels farther than the truth. None of these moments seems large enough to change the future. Together, they change everything. Research from Harvard University has emphasized that the opening years of the Apache Wars cannot be understood through a single battle or dramatic event. Instead, modern historians describe a gradual process in which migration, military expansion, environmental pressure, cultural misunderstanding, and local decisions slowly combined into a conflict that would continue for decades. That gradual change has surrounded you throughout this journey. You have crossed dusty wagon roads with hopeful emigrants searching for new beginnings. You have rested beside quiet springs known to Apache families for generations. You have stood inside unfinished frontier forts where tired soldiers repaired saddles instead of preparing for battle. You have watched merchants, interpreters, guides, and ordinary families quietly hold together a frontier that was becoming more complicated with every passing season. Their stories matter. They always mattered. History often celebrates famous commanders, dramatic victories, and decisive campaigns. Yet the beginning of this conflict belongs just as much to mothers preparing breakfast before sunrise, children learning where fresh water could be found, blacksmiths repairing wagon wheels, scouts reading nearly invisible tracks, and travellers sharing practical advice around evening fires. The frontier was built upon ordinary lives. Those lives carried extraordinary consequences. You walk once more through the broad valleys of the southwest. The mountains remain exactly where they stood when this story began. The rivers continue following ancient channels carved long before any nation claimed these lands. The wind still moves across the grass with quiet patience. Nature has not changed. People have. The roads now carry more wagons than ever before. Military patrols travel more frequently between isolated forts. Settlements slowly expand into permanent communities. Apache families continue adapting with remarkable resilience, while protecting traditions shaped across countless generations. The distance between these different worlds has become smaller. Their misunderstandings have become larger. Historians still debate whether different political choices, stronger diplomacy, or slower expansion might have altered the course of these early years. Some scholars believe greater mutual understanding could have reduced later violence. Others conclude that the enormous forces reshaping the Southwest had already become too powerful for local agreements to contain. The historical evidence encourages careful thought rather than easy certainty. Perhaps that is one of history's greatest lessons. Simple explanations rarely survive close examination. You pause beside the same quiet stream where your journey seemed to begin. The water still slips gently around smooth stones. Cottonwood leaves still whisper in the morning breeze. A small bird lands upon a fallen branch before lifting effortlessly into the brightening sky. The peaceful scene reminds you that history contains both conflict and continuity. Even during difficult years, families continued raising children. Communities continued trading. Travelers continued helping strangers. Neighbors continued sharing food, water, tools, and information. Human kindness never disappeared completely. Neither did human fear. Both walked beside one another across the frontier. As the first sunlight reaches the highest mountain peaks, you realize that you have not been witnessing the height of the Apache Wars. You have been witnessing their beginning. The years ahead will bring larger military campaigns, more determined resistance, new leaders, greater hardship, longer patrols, more forts, more negotiations, more heartbreak. The foundation for all of those future events has already been laid during these quiet early years. Every trail you followed, every fort you visited, every family you met, every careful conversation you observed, each became another stone placed into the history that would unfold across the American Southwest. The morning sun now rises fully above the eastern horizon. Golden light spreads across the valleys, the rivers, the forests, and the distant deserts until the entire landscape glows with quiet warmth. It is a new day. For the people living here, it feels much like any other. For history, however, the frontier has crossed an invisible threshold. Nothing will ever return to exactly what it was before. You take one final slow breath of the cool morning air. The scent of sage lingers. Horse bells ring softly somewhere beyond the hills. The mountains stand silent as they always have, watching generations arrive, struggle, hope, and pass beneath their timeless presence. You quietly leave the valley behind, knowing that this chapter has reached its gentle ending while another waits beyond the next distant ridge. May the lessons of patience, resilience, humility, and careful understanding remain with you long after the campfires have faded from view. As our journey comes to its peaceful close, thank you for spending these quiet hours exploring the opening years of the Apache Wars with me. If there was one moment, one place, or one person that stayed with you the longest, I would truly enjoy reading about it in the comments. Your thoughts help bring these stories to life for everyone listening. If you found this calm journey through history relaxing, there are many more long historical adventures waiting for you on the channel, each exploring another forgotten world at a gentle pace. Until our next evening together, take good care of yourself, rest well, and may tonight's story carry you into a peaceful sleep filled with quiet landscapes, distant campfires, and endless stars.